Halfway through.
Right.
Somebody else post on. All right. True story. All right. Yep. So we're tonight. First item is going to be the irrigation well option, and Mr. Cody Bird, Plan Director, will present on it.
All right. Thank you, Mayor. Good evening. Okay. So I wanted to do start with a quick introduction and background. The couple of existing wells that are part of the full development request, and he's here in attendance tonight as well as Jeff Rowe and Tom Dugan that are on Darren's team. We had because of the nature of this subject matter, it might be appropriate if they were able to respond to questions. I might ask if they can come up and sit at the table or at least run down.
I don't bite. If you guys just want to. Yeah, we should try.
Master plan for that proposed development as part of that annexation request. Really, the point of reference, it's really not the point of the next discussion, talk about the details of the development plan or the conceptual plan. I thought it'd be helpful to conceptualize the complexity of how it relates to projects. So this proposed development is right now in the annexation phase. The board has continued that conversation a couple of times to allow coordination on the irrigation wells. Developer is continuing with testing of those wells and marketing those results back to the town for review. We've talked quite a bit at a staff level and developer level on some different ways that can be approached to handle the irrigation demand for this proposed development. Knowing that it's a large development, there are only 2 wells. There's a second handout that shows where those wells are adjudicated to, just kind of frame of reference. When I say adjudicated, that's referring to the 5 geographical areas for which that water, groundwater, and the wells can legally be used, and can be used off of that site. It's limited to those areas. So 2 wells to irrigate a 300-acre development is quite a bit different than any other subdivision that we've had in Washington to date. In the sense that it's a larger area with only a few. On contrast with other subdivisions that have 2 wells serving 1 colony. The scale and magnitude of this proposed development, in conversations with the developer, we've identified that probably the only realistic path to developing something that achieves everything that this proposal is intended to achieve is through phases. A phased development plan, and we've presented some of that information through this conceptual plan and in the annexation agreement conversations, including vesting periods for how long it takes to secure the property rights to enable something of this magnitude to happen. In the context of the irrigation water, the typical process that the town has relied upon in the past when an irrigation well is converted from agricultural purposes to irrigating mostly residential lawns, in some instances some commercial aspects as well. In those past development scenarios, the town has either desired to acquire the water right to the groundwater to the wells, or has given that water right back to the homeowners association to own the water rights and maintain the wells and the operation system for the irrigation. The developer typically installs it, pays for it, recovers costs from sale of the lots in those subdivisions. And the ultimate ownership of maintenance is the responsibility of the HOA when it's turned over from the developer to the owners. In this particular scenario, what has been discussed is because this is such a large development, only 2 wells, and the timeline that it would take to develop this property in full with those 2 wells and provide all the irrigation requirements for this whole area, that's going to take significantly longer than the typical subdivision where it's turned over to homeowners to maintain those systems. And so as a means of ensuring some consistent, first of all, the upfront improvements of the system much larger than any other direct subdivision has in its responsibility for irrigation, making the upfront improvements, carrying the cost of those improvements, and then maintaining it so that there's some consistency and ensure the viability of those systems for that duration of the development phases was one, important staff to make sure that this is going to be successful. And 2, it's important from a developer's perspective that, not to speak for Mr. Roberson, but what I've heard time and time again is there's a significant cost to developing systems and ensuring that maintenance over a period of time where they can cover that investment with a piece of the developer's equation that they have to contemplate as well. So that's a super high level background. I'm happy to answer some questions on that. But what I really wanted to accomplish is I identified some bullet points in the memo. I'm trying to keep that brief. They're just bullet points for topics of consideration. And what I put together as a handout for tonight are just a series of questions that the town staff and the developer are seeking board guidance and direction. I printed those out just so you can have in front of you and take some notes for your own purposes and to kind of help guide the conversation as we go, because this is a complex subject matter. And tonight, really, we're not trying to solve the details of the design of these systems, the operations of these systems, the cost of these systems. Tonight, what we're seeking is board direction on a few salient points that will enable the developer to make some decisions from their perspective and the town staff to have enough information to negotiate a direction for how to achieve this development proposal as envisioned. Any questions on kind of what I've put together in the direction and the questions? I know you haven't seen the questions because they're in the handout, but I'll go over those, and I intended to go over them kind of one at a time just to help keep the conversation.
I do have a question, and this is related to the packet of information that was sent out. In one of your backgrounds and discussions, it states that the developer has proposed the creation of 1 or more entities to own the well's water rights. Who sets the cost of the metered water? Is that the developer sets the cost of that water if he owns the wells and rights to it, or is it the town of Wellington that will be setting those costs and water rights?
An excellent question, Trustee Teets, and it's one that we've talked quite a bit about. We don't have the answers to that, but we intend to cover that topic tonight. It's one of the questions in the handout is to get to the financing, the safeguards, and there are some concerns that town staff has identified in terms of protecting the viability of the systems, the operation of the systems, and the cost and predictability for the residents or business owners that are purchasing properties within this development as well. So it's a really great question, and I know we're going to get that topic throughout the question.
Okay, my secondary question to that is if he owns the rights and does end up setting those costs, does he also own the watering restrictions? So if he has that as a special watering district, is he allowed to say, well, the town is under watering restrictions for these parcels, but we are our own district and I'm not putting you on watering restrictions because it's the well? So that was my other question. I think that if we have certain subdivisions that say, oh, we are not going to follow the restrictions, and then others in town that have to follow said restrictions, I can see that being a point that's going to be argued by previous residents compared to the new residents that are not on the same watering restrictions.
Sure. Also a really good question, one that we've thought a little bit about too. I think that's also one of the things that we're hoping to get some more direction on. Certainly there's an opportunity to set that up a couple of different ways. We would be soliciting feedback and direction from the board on what the right path is in terms of how that topic is done. So really good question. Mr. Roberson, is there anything else you want to throw up from a background perspective?
I would just say, lost being thrown at you guys tonight. Appreciate you guys letting us be part of the discussions. And thanks for letting us be here and coming out on a cold night. I think we have probably 4 or 5 years of background on this, with Cody's support. You guys are seeing a lot of this for the first time. And again, we're asking for direction. We're not gonna have every answer tonight. But so that we can plan and develop and create an annexation and development agreement that works for if you guys decide to.
Am I correct that the wells have not been tested for flow rate yet?
One is hot off the press, just got tested a week ago, and stopped the other one with cold water. Both wells are adjudicated, Bob, correct me if I'm wrong, but both have been adjudicated for over 400 acre feet. Right now, based off our landscape, design guidelines, we need about 18,000 or 18 million gallons for both sites, which is roughly about 60 acre feet. So I think there's gonna be plenty of water, but we wanna make sure with the drawdowns and everything is adequate. I think we found from the testing last week, we're confident that there's plenty of water. And if not, we plan on doing a second source of water and allocating North Pooter so that North Pooter can also be used for the as a backup system, which I think would be the only site in town that would have 2 possible options of producing water for this. Did I answer your question?
Yes.
Kinda. But again, it's we're having the second well tested again for a second time next Tuesday.
And so the capacity they have is 400 feet each. Okay, cool. That's all I needed.
So that was stated, but we're still waiting for those results to come back.
Can I can start to answer that question too. Sorry, I'm right. I mean, so the town staff is still waiting on the results of the well test. That's a multi-part test that we're looking for. The adjudication, which is the right of those wells to pump a certain degree amount of water, is the 400. I don't have
Over
the
400 acre feet.
I have the documents in front of me, but 400 is approximate for both wells, and so that's a pretty large volume of water. What we're looking for is the sufficiency of the wells to perform, which includes impacts to the aquifer, and we're looking at that, and the pumping rates, which is really more of a mechanical aspect for the pumping system for how fast it can draw the water out, and then how fast the well is recharged with water to supplement that. We need to see those test results to certify that the town feels confident that those are sufficient to meet the irrigation needs. We also know that the town is looking at a much longer horizon than any one point in time in terms of meeting the water supply requirements. And so we have a degree of faith that these wells are going to meet the irrigation demand needs for this subdivision, but we've also raised some of the questions, which we're going to get to here in a minute too, regarding what if those wells don't perform the way that we think they do, whether that's now or 20 years from now. And that's where we proposed to the developer, Mr. Roberson, maybe there's a need for a redundant supply requirement, both in terms of holding water rights for that purpose and also a physical delivery system to get surface water, ditch water to irrigation ponds that then can serve this development. And both are legally acceptable, and we need to figure out what the right quantities are for both of those options or the redundant supply. So all the things that we've been thinking about, hopefully Megan hasn't hit me in the back of the shoulder for misstating anything. But
He's not frowning, so it seems like you're doing okay.
yeah, feel free.
He's pretty confident.
He said these wells pull from an aquifer. What aquifer are they pulling from?
I couldn't name the aquifer for you, so I don't have that information. But as a general rule, you would see that most of the agricultural wells in this region are on the same aquifer.
Similar well that we have like the Sage Meadows or Columbine.
So have we taken into the consideration Glade Reservoir and what that is gonna do to aquifers in our area when we start filling like?
I'm not sure I know the answer to that. We'll make
As far as watershed goes, because watershed comes
yeah.
from,
So I believe it's at the box number, alluvial aquifer.
okay,
That drainage basin goes north from Fort Collins to close to Wyoming. almost all rain. But I don't think they did anything happening.
Thank you, Mr. Gowan. Good question.
Just adjudication, the map that you pull from that rail, that's what I'm reading.
Per well.
For the way.
The legal,
What's the legal?
That is what you have the rights to there, even though there's plenty more water underneath there, normally.
yeah, you adjudicated, in the Coffin wells, you, adjudicated up and don't have to go, and report to the state. On the Sites well, well that is called the, Glen well, it is actually monitored and recorded with the, state water board, but it's, allocated for 405. And they can't go over that, the Sites, the Glen well is, can only pump 1,050 gallons per minute, where the other well can pump at 1,950 gallons. They can't go.
And what's the
For
max,
all the decrees.
yeah, and what's the max that you figure it's gonna need for both of those?
60 acre feet, so we had,
400 on each one.
400 acre feet on each, so the flow rate would just depend on the season.
Right.
if we truly pumped our 850 acre feet on both wells, we would have, we'd have 790 acre feet left over.
Kind of what I was thinking.
But again, we need to have a backup plan when these wells and aquifers go wrong, and that's why we're saying, hey, let's maybe also have a backup plan when we can, because we have access to what we do on both farms. Or a second backup plan, so that, the 60 acre feet is needed to irrigate the whole site. We can hopefully 20 shares.
So one of those wells is a Coffin well, the other one's not.
It actually reports to the state.
So the Glen one is the one.
What are you gonna do with all the extra water?
It has to stay on site, it's not.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we actually have to, all the watering done with, on the one property, has to stay on the one property. And all the watering on the other property, the one property cannot water off to the other.
Illinois, you know.
Well, I think that's why they have it here, so it's left property, and I mean, it transport. Cause it's many, in each parcel, one has 405 and the other one 400, they can take care of the energy.
And again, that's why we have the engineers.
What you're gonna do, with the irrigation, lawns, whatever, right? It's only
For all the
non-pot,
extra,
non-pot.
for all the extra
all
water.
non-pot.
For example, like in the meadows, where I think, when you're a builder.
Right.
When we pulled our permit, we paid the raw water dedication. That was roughly at the time 10,000, now it's about 30,000. You know, on those houses in the meadows, we passed that on. And they paid that as cost of the house. Just like in Sage Meadows, on this site, every builder will get a building permit credit right now roughly of about $31,000. They don't have to dedicate that raw water requirement because of these wells. So, but
More or less an incentive.
an incentive, but I think there's a big value there too. I think we need them, like in the meadows right now. If someone came to me and said, hey, for $400 a year, we'll give you non-potable water to irrigate, you wouldn't have to use town water, I think it would.
Jump on.
I'll tell you right now, I did the math in Sage Meadows, and I don't think our home buyers realize how good of a deal they're getting. If they paid for the electricity only for that well, and for the maintenance of that well, we paid $38.58 this end of the year. And so I guess we're trying to. There's a big drive.
And I just wanted to real quickly, Trustee Big asked about the water dedication, and tonight we're only talking about the outdoor irrigation requirement. Each property, when it's developed, usually at the time of building permit, will also have to satisfy the indoor water requirement. So they're maybe separating the indoor from the outdoors, not really only talking about the outdoor. Indoor will still have to be satisfied. All right, appreciate the context, good questions. Feel free to ask questions as we go. This is the board's meeting tonight for your discussion purposes. I did want to move into the handout with the schedule in it. just to kind of orient you there, there's a title slide, and there's a graphic showing the irrigation area maps I put in there. The page two, is really kind of where I wanted to start. And this is where, I kind of posed these questions. I had some assistance from other town staff who's also here tonight to kind of help frame some of these. And again, we're seeking general guidance and direction from the board. But these are kind of the high level questions that we're attempting to answer that will inform how staff works with the developer in preparing. There was one placeholder in the annexation agreements that were previously presented to the board. There was a placeholder to include language around how we handle irrigation water. And that's the section that we're trying to write based on tonight's discussion. So starting with question number one, the question that we're posing is, does the board support annexing the property with a situation where the town does not acquire an ownership interest in the existing non-potable water wells and water rights? And again, I kind of wanted to frame this in the context of the traditional scenario for irrigation well Wellington has been that the town either takes the water rights dedication or the HOA maintains the rights to those wells. I believe, based on my cursory research, that the town has actually also given a lot of those water rights back to the HOAs, and the town doesn't currently own a lot of groundwater rights because it's adjudicated to a specific area. Having done a subdivision by subdivision analysis on that, but based on our in a cursory review, most instances the water rights are held by a private entity, most often the HOA. And so the question is really, do we want to? This is the opportunity for the town to say we want to have the water rights to that. It's limited to those properties, or do we want to allow private ownership to maintain those well rights and the water rights associated with them?
And all cost incurred of it.
Yeah.
So the owner would be responsible for any and all costs of those systems and failure. And if it does not produce the right amount of water, they would be the ones required to actually come up with the extra acre feet that they would need from North Cooter. That would be nothing that would be related or an additional cost that would be passed down to the town or residents.
That has been staff's intent and direction of kind of anticipating that type of a question. So that is the understanding that we're operating under already, and we can certainly strengthen any contract language or annexation agreement language to state specifically those topics.
I think, in my opinion, I would like to know more about where the rules fit, where if you have ownership of the wells and you hold on to those, who controls the watering restrictions, who controls the rates of the water. That's something I feel that would be very important to look at, kind of.
I mean, I know, we just real quickly will point out that our water restrictions really only relevant to those that are irrigating with potable treated water. So they really don't apply to the HOAs right now that have well sources, raw water sources.
Because the restriction we have in place because of our plant capacity for treatment, right? They're using that and we need to conserve that water during summertime so our plant's not on overload. So that's the whole point for the water restriction. So if you're on a non-pot system, those restrictions are kind of null and void in effect.
So someone could be outside detailing their car in the front of their driveway on a non-pot system and be totally fine.
Well, the yeah, generally speaking, it's really restrictions. I know.
So they should not receive any warnings or any such for.
Well, the owners,
Our current system, for non-pot systems is voluntary. That's the way the board's written that. That's the way that resolution has been written. It's mandatory for those on a pot system. It's voluntary for anybody on a pot system. A non-pot system also needs to be posted. But that's what we've done in the past. If the board in the future decided that a non-pot system should also give a watering restriction if they're not municipality, we can talk about that at that time. In the past, we've just never tried to do it.
No, I'm not. I'm just curious.
it's non-pot. Most spigots that are coming out of the house are coming out of treated water, so that's not non-pot.
Yeah.
So non-pot is typically just irrigation because you don't want somebody to consume that water.
Got it. So if someone's
So
watering.
usually if you live in a neighborhood with a non-pot system, that house, quote unquote, isn't hooked up to just the irrigation is.
Okay, for the spigots outside.
So the scenario you provided of washing the car,
And not for the sticks, but.
that would apply.
If they're-
to it.
yeah.
Got it.
Yeah, but not that anything for irrigation, we can schedule it at noon every day if we wanted, and that wouldn't violate our water restrictions, but they would be dumb for doing that. They would not be efficient using the water.
Not be efficiently, but again, you know, it's one of those things where you're curious. Some people don't concern themselves if they want to have extra green grass, even if they're on a non-pot system, even if they wanted to hook up to a spigot in the house. They could still run water from their home from treated town water, correct? So,
And that would apply
Is the problem.
so that's where I'm looking at for that curiosity. It comes in usable water and who controls those rates then, because if we're giving a discounted rate,
Or,
Then-
I mean, traditionally, an HOA runs the well.
Mhm.
And maintains those wells and runs those water and how it needs to run. And that's, I would venture to say we should apply. I know people in Wyoming that live in Newport, Dakota, where they all share a well.
Mhm.
So they all put in that first for the pumps, for the maintenance services. Right, and so that's best practice. Basically, they're just asking us if we support best practice with these wells.
I think from pretty high level, I would like to see this treated as basically the same way that we treat all the other subdivisions that are on well water. So Wellington Point, Harvest Village, Sage Meadows, that type of thing. Whereas the HOA is setting the rates as far as that goes for maintenance and the upkeep of the well, also including the usage as far as that goes, and keep the town's interest out of that. That way the town is not responsible for maintenance or anything like this. Now, we had an issue with this when we had the Harvest Village discussion here a little while back, right, where they were having an issue with one of their wells, and we basically told them, hey, you know, this belongs to you guys, and if you guys need to take that back to your HOA and increase the rates, then that's what you need to do. It's got nothing to do with the town. So I would like to see it treated the same way that we do with most of the other non-pot systems, well systems in town, as far as the other subdivisions. I think that only makes sense, and it keeps the town interest out of it. And
So it turns it over to the HOA. So, but what they're asking for is to keep it with the owner,
We don't think HOA is doing a good job. of
not the
running well.
HOA.
In fact, the harvest well hasn't been dedicated to the HOA yet.
No, it's still in town, from my understanding. It was still with the town of,
Yep. Right, and we actually worked with, Alden Hill, because at one time Columbine the HOA didn't have the well. We got with Alden Hill to make sure it was dedicated to the HOA. But HOA and HOA, boards are not, and this project's so large, it's gonna take 20-25 years to go through. And there's gonna be the master association, seven associations, and there's gonna be a traditional side and a multi-family side. We wanna make sure there's a master, and then we wanna make sure there's an SBE that actually owns just the well part, and let the master, run the delivery system side of it. And in the covenants, we can control water restrictions, just like in Sandy Meadows. We restrict, there's no water in Canada 6, but, there's plenty of water for the community. But there's still restrictions that can put in the covenants that, you know, they can't tap into the town water system and all that.
and
stuff.
that would be
Run
one of my
irrigation,
concerns.
because they're getting the credit, because the raw
Yeah.
water dedications come from the well.
Yeah.
But we see the value of the well, we see that an HOA is not very good at running a well, or managing a well system. So you need someone in place, or entity in place to manage and run that as the site develops and goes through. Then you have your master association doing the delivery system, kind of like what you're talking about now with the HOAs. And then you got your associations for the home buyers, because each sub-association is gonna be a little different.
Sure, and I think you bring up a good point there. I personally, I wouldn't have any issue with an SPE, handling that side of the house. I think obviously as far as what you said, as far as HOA goes, that makes a lot of sense. And again, I think that's kind of some of the issue that we had seen there with Harvest Village. I think if it does come back to an FPE, obviously what we would not want to do is see a situation where residents are being overcharged or something like that for as far as the
That's what the covenant.
So let me answer this. I think we gotta work with town staff and engineers and work on a watering system. We have an example, we just didn't wanna flood everybody tonight, where like in Rain Dance, another subdivision, with their home buyers. And a lot of metro districts do that. This is what we're asking for you guys. We don't want to metro. My attorney keeps on telling me, we want to metro. You know what, if I was a developer, I would, but I'm a builder also. You know what, it doesn't work well with the end consumer, so we don't. But we also want to get the value of the wells and the water savings in the building that we're creating for all these builders. But that said, lost the next one. Oh, and the piece, we think we can come up with a plan or, you know, I think, their plan right now is there's an annual rate of $225, and you gotta tap into that system. And then roughly takes about 42,000 gallons on 2,500 square foot of size for a watering season. They're charged $3.80 for that water. It equates to about 350 to 400 bucks annually per house. And that's what we're paying for the water. So by far, we need to make sure that we keep it at a much lower rate than what the town rate is. And that's what town staff and engineers and all of us need to figure out. We just need the guidance that if you'll allow this SBA. And again, we understand it needs to be, it can flow as the town water rates goes up. It can also float up over time. Because now compared to 10 years from now, water's gonna go up. But we still need to keep it at a substantial discounted price. So the end user, first of all, it's gonna be in the covenants they must use it on, but also that it's at a discount. So
Right.
there's an incentive.
So, and this would be all water that is directly pulled from your well that you own and maintain and honestly, at the end of the day, I'm interested in looking at what the SPE would look like as long as we're guaranteed that eventually we're not gonna be like, oh crap, we have no water. Now we're pulling from town water tap, irrigation water, and then they're getting that discounted rate.
I think that's where these next goals will come.
Let me say this, if this well goes dry on this site, they're probably all gonna go dry.
Right.
Columbine, Harvest, Sage Meadow, and everywhere. At least we have a backup plan in place to also deliver North Booter. Now, are you guys gonna go to every resident in Harvest and in Sage Meadows and in Columbine and make them dedicate raw water that wasn't dedicated at the time they bought their house?
Development agreement, second.
We're gonna deliver treated water and have that raw water. So I'll just go and answer that.
But I'm just saying, so it's, and that's kind of why we want to.
Understandable. So, and you can secure 20 shares of North Dakota?
I think there's a lot of options on the table.
And I would say too, that North Tudor is currently the right fit for well, and there are other water sources available that would also be viable in the future and that we could tap into. Not all of those are certainly deliverable today, but through some different arrangements, carriage agreements, and you mentioned, Lloyd Reservoir earlier, there's other opportunities that could come online, all of which are worthy of being explored. So I kind of phrased some of the language in here around North Tudor because that is what makes sense today, but I also included other water sources because there are and will be other options to look at in the future too. The goal to not limit the supply sources, but to contemplate what are the possibilities.
That they would be eventually securable. So I think that's my thing is they have to be eventually securable and deliverable. If you're going to look at the SPE and you enter into these contracts and agreements, you can say, I'm gonna give you $1 million every day, but I can't guarantee that that's gonna happen every day. So when that backup comes through and it's written, it's gotta be a guarantee of a water source. It can't be eventually down the road, hopefully, water source, in my opinion. I'm only speaking for myself, but you can have hopes and dreams, but you see the competition for shares of any kind of water right now. 20 shares is a good amount of shares of water to secure from North Pluto, considering that they're relying on more shares coming available because they can't sell any more shares. They can't, they're done. So they rely on that trading of shares come up they can't divide out their water entity anymore, to my understanding. So it's what comes available, you can purchase, very hefty price. But that's what I wanna make sure of, is when we're looking at moving forward, this isn't and I would never say that, Darren, you'd be a person to do this, but some builders or developers could be like, I promised this, and then we don't see that delivery in the end.
And that's why we'll have to have something in the development agreement and
Yeah.
annexation agreement. We just need to know if this is the path.
And I think, yes, Trustee.
So I actually do have a lot of questions about entities and stuff like that, but I know the question right now is not dealing with that, so, get to those, I will have more questions on that. I agree with Trustee Mason, what he said, I really would like to see this treated pretty much how we would treat other things. I understand from the developer standpoint, this is a small or project, so I understand there might need to be some additional entities to look at. I think, but I agree, Trustee Mason, I really, we don't normally have a controlling stake in our water supplies for neighborhoods, I wouldn't want us to take that on here. So I don't want to see that coming into the town. But I do agree with Trustee Teetz's concerns that we need to make sure that whatever path we're gonna go forward with, it actually lines up. So that's kind of my thoughts on this, then I'll have.
Can I just ask a clarifying question too? I'm under the assumption that any redundant water supply option that the town provided, it would be potable water.
That's correct, that's all we really have
So
available.
it seems pretty clear to me that if we do provide a redundant option and it was to be used for any reason in the future, that we would charge the standard rates that we charge.
I guess I have okay, so what is that? Reservoir 6 right there, 58, Highway 1, is that North Cougar Reservoir 6? Okay, they have a pump house right there in egress along Highway 1, is that correct?
Yeah, it's actually far from using a lot of work for irrigation.
So technically that property could get non-pot from North Cougar Share.
Been irrigated in the past, so then that confirmation just needs to be.
And we'll want to work with that letter.
That's all that's
So
needed
it's a possibility to get non-pot water there as a secondary source if need be in North Cougar. Yeah.
And maybe some clarity to, Trustee Mason's question, maybe if the town were included as a redundant supply option, then the town would not be interested in providing any outdoor irrigation water without water rights dedicated for that purpose. That's really not the leading example that we would like to throw out there as a redundant option. We'd like for the entity or the HOA or whatever the ownership group is to be the sole party responsible for the redundant supply option, not
That was the scenario for the school, was it not? I know it was split.
They wanted to use potable water to back up system for water for teachers.
Yeah, I think what they ended up with was, and Mr. Gowan can correct me if I don't recall the details, but the original request from the school district was to use town treated water for their irrigation because they had concerns with the amount of bathing, especially in the courtyard, that non-potable raw water creates some maintenance fatigue. And we wanted to use the town treated water for irrigation for that purpose. And at that time, because we were under water restrictions, we had significant concerns with the capacity of our treatment plants at that time. We said, no, you have non-potable irrigation available for use that can only be used on that site. Go ahead and use that. That's what you should do. They then asked if the town could, as a redundant supply option, if their well was down for maintenance or what have you, could they keep their courtyard gas alive using town treated water? We said, as long as you do it. So that was, it was kind of a
like the
similar,
opposite
yeah,
box, but kind of
Yeah.
same.
same idea.
Yeah, that's good. So I guess the high level question for this first one is, do we support pursuing this when more answers to come?
I do.
Yeah? Okay. Question 2. Go for it.
And I'll point out too, we've kind of touched on a little bit of 2, we've touched on a little bit of 3, a little bit of 4 and 5. Some of these questions, while we wrote them as a means to kind of keep things focused, we recognize that there's a lot of overlap in this one topic. So know that some of the comments that were made, I've been trying to, keep notes, others should take notes too. We've kind of touched on a couple of the questions, but it might be helpful to go over them, and really get, clear discussion on each one. So the second question is really focused on, whether or not the town would support allowing management and operations of management of the wells and the water rights by a different entity. The developer made that statement earlier, has made that very clear to staff as well, that they don't really support a metropolitan district. Staff does point out here that is a viable and legal alternative for creating such an entity. Title 32 of the Colorado Revised Statutes provides a framework for creation of special districts. There are a lot of different types of special districts or metro districts. One of them, water districts like Elko is another one. Fire districts like Washington Fire is another Title 32 special district. So there's a lot of different applications for those provisions, but either a special district for like a water district is a viable path there. A metropolitan district is a little more nuanced and has a different application to it, and that is also a viable path. Developer proposed a special purpose entity or SPE, and we've been using that term here tonight, as another alternative path for creating an entity for the purpose of owning and managing the water rights for the well, possibly also or preferably also the redundant supply option through North Pluto or other surface water rights. So the focus of this question is really to ask, of the available options out there, Title 32 districts, metropolitan districts, special purpose entities, is there any preference for what type of entity would be most appropriate for this given set of circumstances?
I was very glad to hear that you guys don't want a metropolitan district, because I don't think that's a good option. The main question we have it kind of comes down to what is entailed with each of the different districts. So with a special purpose, so my assumption, like with a water district, that's a Title 32 district. I'm assuming that would be an elected board would that would be elected from the residents within that area. With an SPE, who manages and runs that? Is that just assigned to a specific entity? That's the developer that runs that, owns that, and maintains it. My preference would be, if we're going to go a route to that it's something that's owned by the people that actually live there, right? So if they're the ones that are having to pay the bill, right? Because Trustee Keith made a good point, and it would be something that if there are changes that need to happen, upgrades, pump goes out, they have to pay for it, right? It doesn't matter who owns it, right? If the town owns it, you're gonna have to pay for it through increased water rates. If the water district owns it, you're gonna have to pay for that through increased water rates. If the SPE owns it, it's going to have to get paid for by money that's going to increase over time. So that would be, if we're looking at those, that would be my preference, is to look at something where at the end that actually is continued to be owned over time by the people that are actually having to pay the bills for that, right? They're having that right checks. So that would be my preference. I don't know what that looks like in terms of what developers are looking for. I don't know what that looks like in terms of governance ability to make decisions. I don't know the differences between that.
So my question is, who is the SPE accountable? So who can hold them accountable?
The HOA would hold them accountable. Yeah. It'd be a single entity, SPE at the time, that eventually could be turned over to homeowners. Again, I think I just got done saying, I don't think homeowners are very good managers of well systems. The SPE would actually maintain the well system that's pumping it.
Yep.
So it actually wouldn't be the home buyers that would be required to actually replace that well.
Correct. And that was my understanding.
The SPE.
Right.
So they had almost
So
like to
that's
hire.
my question is.
So
Go ahead.
if you have an SPE, right, and you're the ones that are maintaining it very well, and then you answer to the HOA, I mean, in essence, would the HOA be the board or the SPE? Or is that's the same thing as a Title 32?
They're not the same. I don't think they're the same.
So there's no way you're really held to account by the HOA other than the fact you provide water to them. And
You provide water to the master association.
I mean, you wouldn't necessarily want to fight the hand that feeds you kind of deal, right? So it's kind of a checks and balance in and of itself without having governing body.
correct me if I'm wrong, but yes, and it would also be part of the annexation and development agreements that the SBE only supplies the master association, supplies the subs, the water.
Okay, this entire arrangement, the SPD, the master HOA, sub HOA, just put a lot of attorney developing ideas around it. What we're really talking about is the annexation agreement. After that, will be development agreements that are the town relationship with this SPD and how the town interacts with it. But then also that SPE, in order to deliver water to the master HOA, which in turn would get sub HOA delivery, there's an arrangement of contract. It's like the 103. Because at each of these stages, there's a contractual who holds the SPD accountable. It could be the HOA, because the HOA, if it doesn't water, it's gonna go out to the SPD. So
And that's what.
there's an interaction of all of these.
This
different-
one definitely here. But that's what we need, town staff, attorneys, all to create, so that everybody's held accountable.
And like I said, there's, with the annexation agreement, with the development agreements, the annexation agreement is really high level. And once we get to the development agreements, there's gonna be a lot of interaction between the town and the developer on how the town wants to interact with that entity as it's created.
Maybe the town regulates, yes, that has some regulation.
I mean, I think there'll be some, but I think, but maybe part,
Direction on what do you allow in SB.
right, and then a lot of that comes from those other contracts.
No, sorry, I didn't.
No, I just started. It's okay. So what are some potential ways that SPEs?
Privately, the SPE would have to be private, no, well, the SPE would have to be privately funded by the ownership group to get things started. The way this is proposed is that the upfront cost is the responsibility of the SPE to get that going, and then they would be looking to recover their investment over a longer period of time as development phases are sold and additional users are put on the.
So by individual residents then?
Yes, so like, I think what Mr. Robertson was saying is, for example, like, right now, if you have a non-pot system, you pay like, brother, I think pay like $200 a year, that's it. But in this case, you pay your $300 or $400 actually, and
Whatever.
you might pay X number of dollars per gallon. That money would come back to the cost of you to run it, the initial investment.
Maintenance.
It's basically like a new water utility for that area.
That's what the water
irrigation. They've got their own base stuff that they set for people.
Well, these big savings on affordable housing, because if this well's not allowed to be used on housing, then when the builder pulls that permit, he's gonna have to dedicate another 31,000.
Yeah.
Which increases the price of housing.
Yeah. So that 31,000 is pretty much tacked on.
Where,
Those are today's numbers.
yeah,
Right.
that's the other one.
Where if this well is approved, they can remove that 30,000.
That's for money, irrigation.
So that cost from the residents is only with the new purchase of the brand. Right, or would that be a cost that's passed on with your retail? I mean, they could value it however they want.
Probably your HOA.
It's like dues, not the purchase. Okay, so there's several things I've heard. So Title 32 is taxes. Right? The taxes.
Can I answer that
Yeah,
question
please,
before you move on?
let's get like
Yes, please.
professional
Maybe
people
now-
rather than.
So before we move on to the other questions, a Title 32 special district is formation of a quasi-governmental entity. They have a board, they have voters within their district. They have the right to assess a mill levy, which is a taxing authority. So the short answer to your question is yes. A metro district, a water district, any Title 32 special district is a governmental entity that has voters and.
So, all right, so taxes, and then we're talking about, entity which potentially charges through HOA. And then I'm hearing that there could be overage fees or anything that has to be metered, therefore has to have its own employees, right? I'm going down the right track, right? Is there anything that's here? Because, potentially, I guess there could be overage fees. So they're charging for the person on water, however they end up charging. So it's really charged per use, I mean, they would determine, um, for the homeowners.
I just want to be clear, maybe to tack on to
Yes,
what
please.
you're saying. As far as the current HOAs go, it's just a flat fee as far as your dues go. So none of those, my understanding is because the existing developments are not metered in any way. I get your concern there where somebody could be using a significant one for one that's
And I'm
else.
trying to, yeah, and I agree, that's how it is. So this is, I'm trying to understand the differences, because right now people pay a certain amount of money that's allocated to water for the like harvest. I'm sure, I don't know. But, so I'm trying to just separate the differences, so I kind of understand the impact. Because of course, affordability is paramount at this point, so, my assumption is it'll always be less for water, given it's from a well than potable, but potable wouldn't be an option, we wouldn't even consider that. I don't think we should compare it against if they were watering potable, because that's not even an option. That development, I would never. So the cost of the water is really what impacts the residents, the entities which determines the rates. So my question is, like, if we were to consider this, would we put controls on that? Or is there an option to put controls on it?
And that was my question is, who are they accountable to?
Okay, so we're going to,
But the SPE, at the end of the day, how no rampant are they allowed to go on what they are going to, and who can say enough when, when and if, I'm not saying it will, go through the roof, who gets to say, okay, this is not.
Mr. Goodman?
Waving his hands around.
What I was gonna say, it sounds kind of like we have that option either way, whether it's an SPD or a water district. We have the ability to write in that contract to say whatever goal we would want them to have.
We come up with breath number 2, so we can go on number 3. So this is really question 3, which I agree.
We support allowing.
I support allowing it.
That
I
was,
think it's the details of how that.
And then we can
Question
take through this
two.
detail, support an SPE, right? It sounds like, so we don't want to
Yeah.
tax.
We don't need it.
No.
I think we would want to keep the least burden on residents as possible. The tax is probably the
And the board, they can run mill levies, I mean, let's try to avoid that at all costs.
yeah.
Right, and then
We don't want to do.
the
Yeah.
SPA would actually overall be controlled by the HOA.
I mean, whether it's no,
It could,
No,
so this,
no,
well, no, it's not.
down the road, initially not.
Think of it,
the
that way.
master association.
The mass, okay.
But the SPE owns the water, the well.
Think of the SP as a private company that is providing, they are putting in the money up front, right? They're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions of dollars, purchasing land, purchasing water rights. And then they are going to run at a profit to make that money back from the HOA, not whoever else they still have water. Yes, they'll have contracts. I don't know what you have over that. There will be contracts within that, but understand that they make their own decisions on it. We need to continue to be functional and viable as a station.
Maybe I'm stepping out of turn, but, the town of Berkeley, I mean, this is, hindsight, you can't look back to the past. But with all these Stockton wells that you know, they had for Columbines, the Knolls, Sage Meadows, Harvest. Town of Wellington should have started up. You guys should have owned the wells, because you're not charging the $30,000 for the raw water dedication, correct? And then you guys should have been charging all the residents in those communities a usage fee of a couple $100, which would have went into the water district. Because you're giving them a raw water dedication that you didn't receive. We're saying that. I mean, hindsight 30 years ago would have been great to set it up for the town of Wellington, but it was a small town. It was still being in water, you know? We're not gonna access property unless we in control as well, because it's such a long period before this project has been done. Now, the town's gonna guide us and restrict us on, so that we can't abuse the system.
Right.
That's the stuff we'll figure out. We just need that guidance.
So if I can, in my understanding is, and this might help you because I was thinking about it in, the bubble graph that you have. So the SPE is the top of the bubble graph, and that is Darren. Let's say he's the initial investor in a multi-million-dollar corporation. And pretty much what he does is he invests in all the infrastructure to build the product and then sells the product to the master, who then incorporates, say, looking at commercial, multifamily residential, the open parks and space and stuff like that. So I look at it as, in order to regain it, it's like its own business. They have to have an end user that invests to keep the SPE operating. And pretty much so, they're not buying the water from the SPE, they're buying from the master association. And what HOA dues are what's invested in that master association and fees.
It's a one-off fee to pay it.
Yeah. So is that a good assimilation when you're looking at it in this is how my head is pretty much.
That's pretty painful.
Okay. So, and at the end of the day, the only true people that this will affect is saying that we would not move forward with an agreement that takes town water for non-potable systems. At the end of the day, the only people that this is going to affect are those that buy into these two well properties. So the Kirshner well or the Glen well, as they function as different entities, because you cannot counter over from one property to the next. So say the commercial will have probably their own section and then residential, multifamily, stuff like that. So how I look at it is if a homeowner goes in or a business or a commercial entity goes in, knowing what's required, what the restrictions are, the total cost, at the end of the day, it's the same as an HOA that says, I'm telling you that this is how much you're gonna pay for trash service. I don't think that involves the town at all, because the town doesn't tell me how much I'm paying for my trash service in my HOA. I think it's great if we set up some
So are you
kind of,
investing now?
no, I'm just, at the end of the day, I would support the SPE, but I would also say that this really, yeah. So at the end of the day, if that's its own entity and they're entering into that HOA, of course, there should be a safety measure set in place that protects the residents or businesses in those two properties. But when it comes to anything further, I don't know if it's really the town's place to step in and issue that. Yes,
Well, I can say that our biggest question / concern was that in 30 years, the rates, whatever, for this private raw water system are close enough to our irrigation rates that they're tempted to use our water. Well, that's a bad thing, but for water rights, which we provide, having a non-cost system like Darren mentioned earlier, we would like to have one today. Maybe we could kind of get a little baby step here in terms of setting up some guidelines. But that's really our main concern, is just more that if users are kind of driven to use water from their hose pipe or just hook their irrigation system up into the house, then suddenly other customers are subsidizing those customers. Cover the loss of the revenue.
and that was my question about the external tax and how that ties into what can be used and what can't be used. So I think those are questions.
Concern we had, and heard Aaron mention earlier. So the end price to the resident is such that it's not going to be competitive with our rates from the tap, from behind the domestic meter.
Right.
So the whole point of this, more or less, is to protect our infrastructure and the residents that are using our system for their watering overall. And it's not really us being overbearing, but it's more or less for our own protection.
That was our primary concern, to protect our customers in the future. And then also just to try and help our future residents make sure that they get a decent deal.
Yeah.
So we're,
The agreements that we need to work out with our staff.
How do you monitor that? How do you meter if someone is retying into an irrigation line to utilize? Is there a way?
Oh,
to-
yes, you'll see it, it's obvious.
You can see like one house, others that are using hundreds of gallons.
Okay, so it is,
your
We'll
water.
start to see that splash in the summer, and you wouldn't expect to see if they didn't have.
okay, so it is detectable. Okay, perfect.
I'm looking back to your question, trustee, again. If you think about it in terms of your tiered structure for your water rates and your base includes the 3,000 gallons as an average townwide. If you're over the 3,000 gallons, you start to question is it a large family or is it irrigation or something else? And 7,000 gallons was the next tiered threshold, which was another kind of tipping point in the data. It indicates beyond that, it's outside of normal practices. So there are some pretty simple to identify triggers that would either be a leak or something else is going on here that would at least cause town staff to go and ask some questions around that particular utility.
So all the potable water that goes into the additions into our system, we're gonna charge, correct? So if they tie into our potable water, put it into their irrigation system, it's gonna show up and like you say, it's gonna be a huge spike. So they ain't getting it for free.
No, but they would have never provided any water.
Here's the kicker,
Correct.
is they'll pay the $10 or whatever,
Yeah.
which pays for operations today. The problem is, we charge that, call it 30 grand, right, up front, saying, this money is going to help pay for future pay extensions. So that, we're not recouping that.
Yeah.
We're recouping the
Well, that
monthly,
would be-
but we're not recouping the upfront costs, which, those upfront costs, the reason we're in the hole we're in right now is because we weren't recouping enough, we weren't keeping those upfront costs over the decades before, which led to us needing to take out the loans we had to take out. So that's why this is important, is we don't want to lose that.
You flooded your capital cost with your water rights a little bit there. The general intent was right, that we can town and. But in the water, so we're going to cash this.
Each phase and each development agreement would spell that out that they're required.
So we are definitely into question number 3.
Yes.
Discussion. Before we continue that conversation, can I wrap up question number 2 quickly? I think what I'm hearing was that there is general support for pursuing an option like an SPE. And I didn't hear any support for a metro district or other Title 32 account. Is that
Correct.
good summary? Information?
Yeah.
Thank you.
I did like the idea of a water district, but I wasn't thinking about it. Generally better things, so I want to make sure there's limits in place, but generally private enterprise does a better job than public. So I agree, yeah, that's piece better.
Well, and then you have an educated source.
Yeah, I was thinking about it, and then as we're talking about it, I'm like, actually.
I agree with that for this project, especially because he's not interested in that logistics, so why would we consider that? But I'm not opposed to someone coming to us with an idea of metro district.
So the commercial side might be a perfect place.
That's what I was wondering.
And so that's,
So I don't want to shut that down, is what I'm saying, I was like, we should treat it for, we're being asked this for this consideration. If a metro district does come and happen to come about, I would love to hear it.
This would be favored.
I think for the pay for all the public improvements that commercial is gonna need in 58, it's a prime. It's a good source of.
and so to kind of put that in context for where the town is at currently in this process and the longer term build out of this phase development plan. What's the annexation agreement that we presented in the past and other projects, and think this one was that the town can enter into agreements with the developer to create a metro district or other type of district in the future, or other available entities that provide certain functions like tax increment finance districts and other things. Those are all viable tools that are allowed by the state that have a specific process and purpose for creation. What most of your agreements say is the town does not outright just rule them out and say, no, we won't even consider it. But it identifies that those can be pursued if the proper steps are taken in the future and agreed to by the parties. Is that still consistent with the board's thinking that those might be down the road as part of the future development phase? we don't even know the answer to those questions yet. Right now, we're not gonna eliminate the possibility, we'll keep the possibility, but right now, the leading example is that an SPE is the preferred path for at least getting this project started. Other development phases might have different considerations.
And we can talk.
And that will come before us if you look at those different districts, us as trustees.
Each development phase would require approval by the.
Okay, so and that's, but as far as you're looking at special districts, any kind of special district requested, no matter if it's in like the residential commercial combination or anything like that, it would still come before us as trustees, correct?
Metro district or.
Any kind of
I
special
don't-
district.
Not any kind of special district. A special district can be petitioned by the residents. And it's a,
Okay,
so I don't want to say too blanket of a statement. A metro district for this property, commercial residential, that would be a discussion. But special districts encompass a large number of different kinds of entities that are separate government from. So I don't want to make too broad.
Yeah, an example there is the Cody Library District is the Title 32 district. The Title 1 didn't have to approve that.
right.
So that's what it is, there's nuance, but for the metro district, that's specific to Wellington and specific developments, that would require. Okay, thank you for that clarification. Question number 3, we've already kind of dug into this a little bit. What town staff kind of presented in our conversations with the developer and guidance on site was, there's already been a couple of questions around protecting the town's utility infrastructure, protecting our town's current residents for use of our town's treated water supply, protecting pricing options for future residents of this development and businesses too, because there's commercial aspects as well. So this question is, at the heart of it is, does the board want to take measurable steps now to protect those, put safeguards in place for those components? I think I heard the answer yes, just through your questions. What I would like to seek guidance on at this point, I think the answer was yes, we heard it pretty loud and clear. The guidance we'd be looking for is giving us some sort of a reasonable starting point or identifying what your highest concerns are and give an opportunity to town staff and developers to figure out some of the nuts and bolts and mechanics of how to make that work. Because we don't know the answers, we would like to go and try to find those answers, but we need some high level direction before we can really inform those.
Two priorities are affordability and then the item that.
That's the same for me. It can't, one, it cannot affect people outside of that irrigation district. And 2, it can't be abused where it makes it unaffordable for those living in I prefer that Wellington start transitioning from making news because of, well, a lot of things, but water costs, to making news because we're supporting affordable building and development. So that's kind of my thing too, is I want it to be protected, but also I don't want the town to overstep, I guess, in the SPE for that.
Yeah, I would say on my end, I would prefer that this, again, if we're gonna let a private entity run it, let entity run it. I understand if we need to put like a cap, I don't know how you would do that, agreements or whatnot. Yes, your water bill spike up, it's either. I'll stick, it's pretty good. But I mean, again, my preference, if we're gonna try and put lots of goals on it, then you should do a water district. But if we're gonna say we're gonna let this special entity run it, let them run it, and we need to keep our hands out of it.
Is there any kind of percentage?
That's what we were thinking.
Where,
Feeling bragging.
right, so where it's not to meet a certain percentage of the town water cost. So if there's something that you can look at that specifically states, and I don't know what that percentage would be, I'm not that educated. So, but I'd be curious, so that's great then, I would support a percentage, not to exceed.
And if water increases the town of Wellington, it could fall.
Massive. Yeah.
And that's kind of what direction we were going.
I think that protects both entities.
It does, yeah.
The main thing I was thinking is, I had a leak in my system, watering system, the town found it. I mean, they actually do have pretty good monitoring systems out there for what everybody is using. I would think if somebody actually tied into the water, city water and tried to irrigate the land, that would show up in a heartbeat. Right, and that would be easy enough to detect. We would just need to have some type of guidance on fines or whatever else if they got into our potable water using it for a non-potable source. So, you know, we need to have some type of.
Most probably would have
But
Well,
that's
that's
something
something
for this
for the
conversation.
percentage.
That's
Right,
not
that's-
for-
Right, and I think that would probably take care of a whole bunch of things.
But so on this question,
Would you support
would
a
you
percentage?
support some sort of limit?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yes.
I was wondering if it's possible to add on to this about water quality. Like, I was just looking at Rain Dance and they were noting that their metro district is responsible for treating the water, even though it's, well water, to a point where, or controlling it for algae, male, they measure in particular. Yeah, so I'm just curious if.
Right, but it's about structure, maintaining structure with overspray or fencing, that, I think that's more or less what they're getting into, that regulation.
So I'm just curious if that's something that's just like a best practice that we should just hope that they're doing, but is there any possible way that this? Because if we had an equalized situation, right, without this, there would be mass response, notification, all these kind of things that we would do, right? And that would be based on water, right? So I'm just curious if the entity is held to maybe by the state, I'm not sure, I don't know if that's an asking question, of water quality standards. So it's not a health risk. I mean, obviously, there's gonna be signs, don't drink well water. I would hope that nobody would challenge that. But if there was some extreme situation, I mean, how would that handled? I'm just curious.
And I think we'll treat water, but.
Right.
In Sage Meadows, I think we're one of the few, we actually meter each home, we made the builders put in a meter each individual household on the non-pot. So then down the road, we can also detect if it's water leak or abuse also, if someone's overwatering, so we want to still be doing. We have a micro filter system in our pump house, which, again, I think our pumping something here compared to any other stuff we do, but that way it's filtering out. That could drink it, no, but, but we have tried to put in a micro filter system for better water.
Do you have tentative plans of asking those over to install the near non-pot in the new development?
We'll absolutely, will.
That's probably the only way that we would work is. And, I'm sorry, probably jumping real quick, back to Trustees' question. I think it could also depend on water quality. It sounded like the example you mentioned was maybe also thinking about not just groundwater supply, but surface water supply, also whether it's from a well or from a ditch conveyance. I think the leading idea is that the way to make the most efficient use for irrigation is to deliver that water, whether it's groundwater or surface water, to an irrigation pond. And irrigation ponds might also have a water quality, which is more of a maintenance piece that could depend on whether that's the SPE or an owners association, depending on which maintains and owns that piece of the infrastructure. If it was an irrigation pond that was solely for town purposes on town park property, that might be the town's responsibility to treat for algae, mosquitoes, and other things like that. So there's probably multiple aspects to the question that we need to sort out, at least at a high level, to identify what's needed for annexation, and then maybe a placeholder for future development phases to work out the details for each entity.
I'd like to formally ask that we maybe put the direction in there to research that and kind of report back on that specific concerns, what's the best practice, what's done in other entities, and what do we do already, or what our responsibilities would be versus the entities? Like, what are those options? Or just how it works, education would be good.
I'm not opposed to education, but so, and again, it's a great question, it's a valid question, right? We can require them to put an agreement pretty much where we want. If we're going to put requirements around, it has to meet certain qualities and things like that, I think we need to go water district. Make the government entity that's ruled, because there are rules that follow that. If we're gonna go the route of having this be a private entity that runs it, in my opinion, we need to, right, what is our concern? We don't want people tapping into our irrigation. So honestly, I wouldn't say it follows our rates, just say you can't come within 10% of town rate, done. You can do whatever you want as long as you're not within 10% or, make it, allow them to run it as a private entity. So we can do research and things like that. It's just, I know we talk all the time, we have limited staff time and things like that. I don't want to see us interfering as a government entity into this any more than we absolutely have to. And as I would see it, if our concern is people tapping into our system, that's where we should focus our emphasis. What water is coming out of that is going to be between the SPE and the HOAs. And if they have issues with that, they bring it back to them and say, hey, we're paying you for this, we're having concerns, and then they can either address it or they cannot. There might be some state rules that they have, I'm sure there are some.
That's the problem with education.
That was where my education.
I'm gonna go one step further, guys. You know what? I'm not gonna live forever. I want restrictions because when I'm not here, I want to make sure the next guy doesn't gouge the community also. And I think that's probably the difference of a feather in our cap. But I think I want to work out restrictions with the town to where, guess what? A fair price is a fair price, but gouge is still gouge. And so we just need time to work it out with the town and town staff. I love the idea of going everything to 10%. But that is not the direction that you want to move as. And so there'll be guidelines up front at the beginning, with the first annexation, so that guess what? It controls me, it controls the next person and the next person, so that down the road, this can still be a great community and a great site, because that's what we want to do.
And it protects everybody involved in the town.
Yeah. And I think this could be a great model for the next site. And the next site.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
I don't know if I want to treat water, but we'll figure out what the guidelines
That was
we
the
need to do.
word. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know the words though. That's exactly what.
Concern on my part is if we're saying we're hands off, again, right, when we start putting in requirements, you have to have this check, you have to have this.
Yeah.
That then becomes something that Bob or Megan or somebody's got to be checking a report, whether it's month. And again, it adds more things onto our staff. And again, it's one thing, but what happens? The next one, the next one, the next one. It's like if we're truly going to let the SPE run it, let them run it. And we just say, as long as your rates aren't within this of ours, the other stuff is between you and your customers. Just like it would be like other businesses, right?
Me and my HOA and my trash, follow my trash.
Yeah. So that's just where I don't want to, I want to keep this to where our staff gets this agreement, they iron it out, they figure out what works. I love that you're wanting to put restrictions, so that's great. But here's my view. I want to hear that from Darren. I don't want to hear us telling Darren, you can't do this. I want to hear Darren saying, hey, I'm going to do this because it's the right thing to do. Not because you, the government, told me I have to, right?
And you're gonna see the agreement that staff brings to you. Yep. With the first annexation, we just need guidance.
Yep. So that would
I
be
think we're on the right path.
Then whatever percentage of our race beyond that, you do what you do, and we stay out of it.
If there's something that impacts public health, though, I think it is our responsibility. And like I said, I think that the education can stay or whatever guidelines already existing. But I do want to just make sure to acknowledge that we answer that question, just so we're doing the due diligence.
Well, I think this goes back to identifying the E. coli and that detention pond over on the south side of town. How did we go about detecting that? I mean, there was some kind of check that came into place to say, hey, we identified there's an E. coli in this pond. Don't let your dogs drink out pond water. So is there not protections already set in place for those?
Well, and so that's a different conversation, right? Because that's town land. Right now, we're talking about the developer and his water.
But I think she's referring to like a public
A
space
future-
on
future-
like the.
Future
detention
possibility of
water.
a pond in a park.
Yeah.
In that development, it would be ours. It would be supplied by their quote unquote water, I guess.
I think that I'm hearing a couple of different ideas there, and maybe
It's in phases.
I think there are opportunities to identify more details at other development phases, and each one requires an approval. I'm hearing there's a distinction maybe between, you know, maybe not, treatment is not the right word, but ensuring safety for water within the community, and there are other, rules already on the town books that you can't allow stagnant water staying
Got
in.
Yeah.
There's provisions for making vegetation, algae, mosquito, you know, you can't create an attractive nuisance by neglecting your facilities. There's some other things like that, that we already have on the books, and we continue to explore other possibilities, and we can reach out to other communities to see if they've had any experience in that, and to apply to them. But there's a lot of detail there that we'd like to have an opportunity to think about and not solve those problems tonight, because we need to do some more. Research.
So I mean, as a whole, we can say that we support the
No, because I don't want to put a limit on fees that can be charged. This is.
That's what percentage.
That's like when I said it can't be.
Oh, got it.
That would be,
Perfect.
that's what I would keep, I would keep the limit there. It's enough that it's like people won't be tempted to do something, but outside of that,
But Darren, tell us what it's about.
So, and that's what I would say is leave it up to the financial side and water side to know what 30 years down the road water usage is gonna be in.
Let the heads of the
Yeah.
DE get together and figure something out that they can bring to.
That's where that, because the percentage might be 10, it might be 20. It really depends. Yep.
Maybe a range for some years or something like that, but
For us, it's a little bit more managing the risk.
Yeah.
Risk is
Cause that does come around into the topics that we just talked about, putting that risk of how much staff time will be required to monitor a system. That will maybe not work be the way that we continue to work. Yeah, and we want to limit that need ahead of time.
General rules and responsibilities versus Wellington, I'm sure all those are contractual, I'm sure.
really our rules, we shouldn't have, once it's done.
We can make it
Yep.
easy.
Hands off.
It's yours, you,
Yeah.
it's you and the HOA, we're not involved.
maybe we can think about it some more too, because I think there are some other things out there, like maybe some reporting requirements from the SPE on, you know, how are you making sure that you're within those, you know, agreed upon percentages, maybe annual report to finances, maybe, you know, a quarterly report for maintenance of the ponds, make sure that the vegetation is maintained. I mean, there's a few things that could be pretty low on in the spectrum of staff involvement and time, but still be able to report back to the board on this is working or it's not
For
working.
checks and balances.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't want to rule it out,
I
but I
want to
think
keep that on I want to keep that on their side, not on ours. I want to really limit our having to go through, I think it's great, I mean, report back to the board, whether it's annually or whatever. Needs to be more often, but beyond that, I really don't want. If we're gonna be out of it, I want that, if we're gonna be in it, run it all in. But if we're not gonna run it, like, get our hands out of that, and let it run itself.
Okay, so Bree's, direction given there.
I feel 4 kind of gets answered with 3.
so. This was something that, and there was a little bit of thought put in the order of these questions. You guys have been fantastic and working through a complicated subject matter. I couldn't really decide where to place number 4. It could have been the first question, it could have been the last question. I put it somewhere in the middle. The question was really just, is the board support? We're not gonna have every single answer at the time of annexation. There will be additional development, design, operational considerations, contractual arrangements, development agreements to be figured out for each phase of the development. We don't know what those phases are yet. We have an idea of what phase 1. I've heard from the developer what his idea of phase 1 might look like. But we still don't have all those details yet. We really can't talk about those details until we know if we're gonna annex the property or not. There's no point in incurring soft costs of design if we don't want to go forward. So that question is really put in the middle of it. It's a high level question. We want to keep moving forward and figure things out as we go.
See, and I'm a rules person, so this one is where I get stuck. Because of the fact that we do have it very detailed and lined out on what is required to submit for annexation and development and everything that it is entailed, and I'm a step ABC, and this would go against how our land use code is set up on submitting all the plans and everything before approving development agreement. So that's my one sticking point on this is it's hard to agree to something when you don't have the details that we're saying are very important questions. So that,
Alternatively, it's a commitment to follow the rules every step of the way for every development phase. And the rules could change as we learn more about the town's needs. So it's committing that they have to follow rules at every step.
Both sides.
right, well, so but it won't have to become the civil court planning.
No, not for development agreement.
Development
Development
agreement,
agreement has to-
These-
Site
No,
plans don't.
But all of the additional details will not come before the board of
Through
trustees then.
the development agreement.
It's the same process we went through with South.
So the development agreement. has
I
to
didn't
come-
go through setback. I sat out of that because I didn't attend.
So maybe think of it less specific and more general, that every time a development phase is proposed, could be a subdivision of, 2 commercial lots, it could be a subdivision of 200 residential homes. If it's going through a land entitlement, land development process, the final decision for a subdivision plat and development agreement goes through the planning commission for a recommendation that comes to the board of trustees for a final.
That's typically where we decide what are your water dedications gonna be, how many shares are we giving you less shares because you're doing something differently, or you're doing something that differently and you have to bring more shares. That's all done in the development agreement that we as board approved.
Or makes sense.
Yeah, so I think that I would agree that that makes.
That is the process for everyone. That is not like an exception for this. That's how it works.
Right.
for every-
Yeah, that is the way it works for every development. Really, the question was geared towards, we don't have the answers about the future phases. We won't have those answers until we get into design, just a couple later. So the question is, do we proceed to allow the next step, which would be phase 1, development agreements, subdivision plats, et cetera. I guess if I heard trustee Tietz's question, I'll phrase it a different way. Maybe the concern is, what's the risk to the town by allowing an annexation without those details worked out? Is that?
Right,
that way of
because
looking at
we
it?
also don't have the details of what the wells are providing as far as pumping and deliverables. So there's a lot of things that are not guaranteed yet that we said as a board, we would want to know these details.
You've got the pumping. stuff.
No,
With the decree,
with the decree, but they don't actually
They
have,
have that, saw that because of the.
right,
we want
so,
that.
right, so there's.
So in terms of the risk management for the town, at the time of annexation, for this particular subdivision of development proposal, you're talking about annexing means we agree to bring the property into the town, subject the property to the town's rules and regulations. In this case, it's subject to zoning, which includes a planned new development proposal. And if it's annexed under those terms and conditions, no development can happen without phase 1 approval and subsequent phases of approval. So the annexation piece enables the next steps to happen. The developer can't develop the property for uses that are proposed unless the development agreement is accepted and agreed to by the town.
And so, for example, part of the phase 1 development agreement could be a requirement to show well, that property is sufficient to meet the project. And if they like, well, the well wasn't what we thought it was, then maybe we can change the development agreement and say, okay, well, you have to bring shares of water because you have to plug in the water. But all that can be, they can't move forward with it until that development agreement. And we have to say, or whoever supported that point has to say, yes, we did this.
That's absolutely correct.
and as future phases come on board, we'll have to reassess them.
Right.
Right.
Right, because that's, we're looking at a much longer time frame than here and now today. We're looking at the viability of those wells for a much longer period of time, but we don't know. By the time we get down to the commercial development phase, or the last phase of this development plan, those wells might have been used up and they have to go solely out of surface water rights or some other option. Or maybe they don't proceed if they don't have the water to meet those needs. So all of those details get worked out as we go. Just as the town grows, we don't look at the next annexation until we know if it's gonna work. And those are things that we assess at that time. So in a large viewpoint, it is kind of following this procedural step that's spread it out over a longer period of time. The annexation piece is really just asking, do we want to enable this to happen? and pursue that next step. And at this time, do we want to allow, we go to our next meeting to maintain the water rights? We'll figure the rest of the details out for how it's designed, constructed, paid for at a later stage.
So does this mean a lot more town investment time if we move ahead and then figure out that it's getting cold later? That there's not sufficient water? How much more town staff time gets invested if you start moving forward and addressing the new plot plans, development, stuff like that? How much more town staff time are we investing before?
It's frankly, we would prefer to wait until the details there. The developer's he's got it funded, he's got his performer lined out, it's a real project. And he's put the effort, what money. We know what's real, they know what's real, and we're not revealing. When they come in here.
So there's more or less be no way.
That's how it works for every development. Every single one, the same.
Because just the bigger annexation was a longer time. And so that's why, maybe that's why it's.
To Trustee Teach's point, the majority of the time it's going to staff level is this first. And but this is what we paid him. It literally is his job. Now, obviously we want it to work out, but at the same time, that's literally why we have the planning director. The planning department is to work with developers to bring in whether it's commercial or residential. Like, if we're not doing that, it's like, well, like for us where we're at, right? What do we need? We need more finances, we need more taxes coming in and things like that. How do you get that? We need more people. Look, I look at that
I'm
as
looking at cost recovery of time invested.
So I can attempt to answer that question because I think it's fair. And I will say too that it's not just me.
There's a lot of, yeah, there's a lot of.
Water staff.
Yeah. There's a lot of the cost recovery that needs to be seen when we move forward without guarantees.
So the answer to the question is how much more staff time is involved. I would argue that there's not much difference in staff time compared to trying to figure everything out now and guessing at things that we don't know the answers to versus doing it in phases where we have more certainty with each development phase. A subdivision plot is a subdivision plot. We're gonna have to review that. Planning is gonna have to do advertising for public hearings, etc. Engineering is going to have to review that, and we have planning review fees, we have engineering review fees that recover those costs at each phase of development. So every phase of development that the developer brings in has a cost associated with it that covers town review time for those particular elements related to that.
Great, well, no, so that's not my question, I apologize, I guess I'm not asking this right, because it was already going to be phased in, is what we were told before. That this was going to be in phases and each phase was going to be brought before us as trustees. So that's not my question. I understand that each phase was going to come. That was already discussed and agreed upon. My question, when it comes down to it, is why do we have this question before us? And at the end of the day, if this was something we were already doing, why is this question before us now? What are you asking us to work around? If this is the standard and this is normal, what are you asking us to work around and why does the question have to come before us? So we are working around something that's not required, that is out of the ordinary, correct?
So thank you for the clarification. That makes a lot more sense to me now. And you're right that the phased development plan was presented. That wasn't the intent of this question. This question was really geared towards the non-potable irrigation wells. That phased development is nothing new to our staff. This board understands it. But the nuances for the wells, that there's only 2 wells as we talked about, and there's going to be more than 2 phases of development. But some of the high level decisions affecting the wells, the ownership of those wells, how costs can be contained, or some parameters put on fees to make sure that they're not competing with town treated water and supply, protecting our town residents. Some of those questions get some parameters put on them at the first step, which is annexation, and it has a ripple effect through the phases. So really that question was geared at these high-level questions that affect the water rights of the wells, is there ability to agree to those high-level terms that affect the whole subdivision? Each phase of development, we're going to continue to refine the design, construction, operation of those systems, and it will entail creation of multiple sub-associations that manage the infrastructure for each development phase. We don't have those details today. So there's a little bit of a leap of faith that everyone's gonna work collaboratively and identify, design, and figure out how to make those phases work. But the wells are going to be an overriding element that affects the whole.
Right, and
That's really
we're
the question.
sidestepping around a standard in our land use code that states that they are to bring the non-potable. That's part of our ordinance, correct? It's listed in our ordinance or in our land use code that they are to provide that. So we're sidestepping around that to say we're willing to move forward with an annexation without having all of the rest of the ducks in a row and boxes checked.
I'm not sure I know what you mean by sidestepping, but I think the language you might be referring to in the annexation component is that I don't have the code in front of me, I'm happy to look it up.
I've read it a lot of times.
I think that the language you might be referring to is that the developer provides a statement of how what the historic water rights are for the property and how they intend to provide water for the property.
Correct.
Okay, so what the developer is saying in this instance is the historic water rights for the property include 2 wells that are adjudicated at 400 and 405 acre feet. But the proposal is to continue to use that irrigation water to meet the irrigation water supply requirements for the development. And that answers the question. That's how they're providing irrigation. The mechanics of what entity owns it and how they recover their cost over time is the question that's being asked tonight. But if the question for annexation is that they're providing a statement of what are the water rights and how do they intend to meet the irrigation needs of the subdivision, they've answered that question.
Got it. So I guess then it bounces back to there is really truly no need for this question to begin with then, because we're not being asked anything that's not out of the norm with our ordinance or land use code.
I don't think that we're asking for anything outside of the norm, but this was a different scenario than we've seen in the past, and we're going to be fully transparent with what is proposed for ownership and management of those wells. It's a little bit different because we're adding another layer and just handing the whole thing over to a simple HOA, which is how most of those.
Got it. Perfect.
Thanks for the clarification.
A couple of things regarding recovering costs, just because I want to acknowledge that. After we annex, the other thing that happens is we collect property tax. That's another part of it. And then also the time in which we don't recover all the time spent outside of fees is when we vote no on a development. That's when we don't get anything back. When we, with tons of time work to a final point for development plan, and it comes before our board, and if we voted no, that means that all the time spent on the developer side, on the town of Wellington side, then that's all wasted at that point. That's if you're looking for time recovery. That was the scenario in which we would lose. So I want to just clarify that, but
I'm just looking for time recovered moving forward and going ahead with the annexation without having the answers that we need. Not without the possibility of property tax coming in at a later date or the time invested. Developers can say Frederick, Colorado, developer goes in, invests all this money and finds out there's no water and now they're not building. That is a risk you take in business. So it's not, as far as the developer side of things, it's income lost, but it's also income recovered at the end of the year anyways. But my question was mainly how much more time are we gonna invest when if we are willing to commit that they don't have enough water to provide, or these wells are known to run dry on a regular basis, or in 5 years, they are looking at less water being provided, because right outside of town, there's wells that have completely dried up within the last few years.
all right.
That's what I was looking at, is that recovery.
Thanks for that.
Mhm. So, no, those were my questions.
So we want to question number 5. And again, we kind of touched on this one throughout the conversation.
That's an easy no.
No.
I don't want us involved at all. They can work with whoever they want to figure that out, but I don't want us, we've got enough water in our hands. We don't need to add to it.
But we don't do this for any other.
Yeah, we don't do it anywhere else. It would add more, we have to have staff, it just, no.
Yeah, why would we do it if that's not our income?
I think if I can ask a little bit, dig a little deeper on that. I think part of the question is, and maybe I didn't phrase it very well, but near the end there, if the entity is not meeting the irrigation needs of their development.
That's their responsibility. They need to go find it somewhere else.
Okay.
We're gonna penalize people if they plug in for irrigation system. Put it in limits. So, yeah, if they are taking on this, they're owning it, they're putting in the money, they have, again, right, they have the opportunity long term, just like any business, you have the responsibility to your consumers to make this work. So
The scenario we're considering is that they go out of business.
I know this is if they water, if they just, you can't, they can't do it.
Okay, I guess there's a couple of different scenarios that I have rolled around in my mind, and I think others might have some input as well too. And not to pick on Mr. Roberson, but what if Mr. Roberson gets hit by a bus? What if the entity, it goes insolvent? What if
There's no.
the wells don't produce? So there's a whole host of questions that we don't even know the number of questions that you can have. I guess it's really, if for any reason the entity is not successful in meeting the irrigation needs, these are still town residents that report, or the residents that are voting for town seats and other town operations, and there's a little bit of responsibility to protect our residents. We have a similar clause in most all of our other HOA development agreements, that the town has the opportunity but not the obligation to take over maintenance, to do those things, and can assess costs back to the association. So I threw this in here mostly as a question of, we don't know what may or may not
The
change.
only thing would be like, yes, if everything goes, but I don't want us planning to do that. Like literally, at that point, if they come to us, we're like, great, you're paying us the $30,000 per home, you're bringing water rights, and if they're willing to do that, great. If they're not willing to do that, then.
Yeah. That's the option, option, not obligation.
I agree, but let me ask you this question, guys. If our site looks the way we think it's gonna work, but let's say Columbine's well goes dry, what are you gonna do? It needs to be just in all neighborhoods.
Did we not
My neighbor-
require them
My neighborhood shouldn't
to,
be any different than the other neighborhood.
Right.
in the community.
They all.
was it optional or required?
As we get smarter over time.
Exactly.
That's why.
Yeah, and things do, requirements, regulations, needs, and planning do change over time as we do get smarter and we get burned by past mistakes. Not that this is,
Good, he said.
All neighborhoods, I think, need to be just. I mean, Columbine's no different than Sage Meadows, no different than Harvest, no different than the Sage. And also be treated equally and accountable to.
I agree. I wouldn't wanna, so I mean, I don't know what we have set up there, but again, in my opinion, if someone else is taking over, you're taking over. If you ask us to come back in and help you, then we're gonna reassess what's it gonna cost, and we're gonna tell you this is what it's gonna cost if you want us to come and do it.
This gives us the right to do it if we wish.
And there would
If-
probably be
if-
some
if-
notice
if the event of an
requirements.
emergency, do we have the option?
It's a
Not
safety
that
net
we would be
for the resident.
planning for them. If something came up that we needed the option, it would be there.
Well, it wouldn't have to be there because we're going to set up a safety net and a secondary water source through North Dakota Irrigation, correct?
Why not have multiple safety nets for one cause? Because you never know what's gonna happen.
Or we can't even afford to bring a secondary section of water for our whole town, but you're asking us to say, separate out of
I
it.
need to do it. I'm asking us to have the right to do it down the road if we need to in a situation where it arises.
We'd be getting into hypotheticals that we don't know.
I think that's the third option.
I think it's intended to be.
We have like A, B, and C.
But I think
like-
in terms of at this stage, one of the important things to consider is, the other cases, it's the water rights in the world is owned by the HOA. And so we have some pretty stock language that basically the town can step in and take over the responsibility. The HOA, if it fails to maintain the well, maintain and operate it. The right, not the obligation, right, first of all. Second, the right to step in and then to assess fees to the HOA. Pretty standardized process. If the town took over the HOA and then increased assessments, the pay for a well. In this case, I think the reason there's a real particular question here is if there's an SPE, it's a whole different kind of beast, and would really be no different than we have in our agreements basically with any other association that has one of these wells across town, except it's completely different because the SPE is completely different. So, we think I definitely think it would be good to have it in there as an opportunity, but we need to flesh it out to make sure it's only used as a last ditch, as a last ditch thing. It's not something the town wants to do.
Right.
But if we have to do it, if residents have a problem where they can't get water and we need to step in, I really would recommend having it in there. It's very similar to.
As Mr. Roberson had pointed out too, I mean, certainly when we were reviewing the Harvest Village stuff, it's the same thing we have, is we have the option. Same thing as we have for the other HOAs. So
Is it option requirement for the other one?
In all of those cases, the town has the right but not the obligation to step in. And so it's, essentially, it's if residents come and complain and say, this was all a big crisis, the town looks at it and figures out what we can do. I mean, within the town's resources.
Is there a different government entity that can force us to?
No, it's a contractual arrangement. And so we'd like to make sure it's in the contract with the SBE.
But no, if residents don't have water. And
This
they
is only
can't find
irrigation
it,
water.
Right.
This is only irrigation water.
Okay, so if the residents don't have non-pot water and we have it in our contract that we have an option or an obligation. No, right, but I'm asking, is there any law from a water agency that says we are required to continue to provide water?
Non-pot.
No.
No.
Water.
Irrigation
Non-pot.
water. The town, yeah, the town we have a right to our citizens to provide the indoor treating water.
Right, so
And
that's what I was wondering, is if non-pot had the same rules and regulations as regular water did. Okay, good, mine.
And then I wanted to, everything that Dan said, I'm sorry, Mary, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Trustee Daly had a question.
I'm sorry.
I was giving a thumbs up for Dan's recommendation, ready to move along.
Oh,
In case
okay.
everybody else felt the same.
Are we good?
So question number 6, we've kind of touched on the redundant water supply requirement. Staff felt strongly about this. I think the developer, has said, yeah, that makes sense. It's a protection that probably should be in place, but no one else has currently. Let's figure out a way to do it. We need to figure out the details, the right volume of water, things like that. And we would do that through the phase development approach as we move on. We need to figure out what those numbers are, but we won't know them today. But if you support that requirement, then we can write that into the annexation agreements.
I mean, the same, could we require that other? No, I don't think we require that from other developments. So I think it's a good idea. I think he should do it. And again, in this case, right, it's not an HOA. It's actually, I look at this, right, you're putting in I don't know how much, a lot of money to run a successful business. It would be very wise to have a backup system in place. Again, I come back to what I said before. If we're staying out of it, stay out of it. If you don't want to get the redundant water supplies between you and your customers.
So the
But
redundant
we
water
should-
supply protects our residents that are already service users.
So
We don't do it anywhere else, though. We don't do it anywhere else. No one else will require it.
Unless we should, right? And so it's a very, it's valid, right? It's not anywhere else right now. Sure, but this development is the first of its kind if we move forward with it full well. And so we kind of need to set the gold standard if we move forward with it on how future developments will go. And so it's kind of our responsibility to make sure that we are checking all these boxes off and getting these things done properly. So we're not ran into the ground down the road and we're protecting property value. Businesses that'll be coming here and all of that.
The recommended best practices that we pull from this, we then put into venues, annexation. Yeah, so I feel like this is our opportunity right now to make these changes. Is somebody willing and giving us good information on this too?
And I do think, guys, if the well was dry station hooks, because the ditch lateral that goes right by our holding pond, there's that possibility, but everything I heard from town engineers, because the sky's falling, what happens when the well goes dry? I think a backup plan should be. And if we have the opportunity to do it, we should be made.
Absolutely.
So that's one of the things.
Especially with
A generator, so, that, you know, if any other business was running and they didn't have a way to, you know, operate in a bad situation, they don't have a generator, then, you know, so I understand what you're saying too, but if this is a good best practice that we need to enforce, that, you know, not all good guys like Darren want to enforce, then.
And it like protects the town more or less from becoming like a wasteland. If there is an event where you lost the right, and all of a sudden there's this whole neighborhood that can't water or water the park, and then all of a sudden everything's dead, who's gonna wanna live there?
Right, the way I would look at it is, you know, you're basically running a big old pipe out there to the pump house, which is always off. And we would have the option to do something with that in the event we need it.
So, yes, again, this is where it comes back to hypotheticals. Yes, this is a large enough division that might make sense. But here's the thing, the only reason that, again, in my mind, right, because I look at this is very different. Because a normal HOA, go through all this work, get an on-pot system set up, like my brother, who's in the Knolls, pays $200 a month. Or I don't know what the rate is, it's not very much, right? And that's all his irrigation water, that's all these other things. They don't pay a monthly ongoing fee for their water, which, whether they should or shouldn't, that's a whole other question, but they're not recouping money. One of the things when we talk about ultimate supply, now I understand the town is much larger than a single subdivision, but I've heard numbers that have been in millions of dollars to set up an ultimate supply. So if we're gonna start making, it might make sense, it makes sense, right, for a subdivision or a annexation of this size of PUD, right? But moving forward, if we're talking about this, how is a small developer gonna front the cost of putting together potentially several hundred thousand or millions of dollars when we talk about we wanna keep housing affordable? Like,
Maybe it's only a requirement of SPs. Or.
so it makes sense with an SPE because you can recoup those costs. But right, we've never done that before. I don't anticipate us doing this all the time. An SPA has the ability to recoup the cost. But in a normal non-pot system, we're talking about, we're trying to set a blueprint. Might be a blueprint if we have another something at this
For
size.
this style.
Right. So that's kind of where the concern comes in from my end.
And maybe I wasn't clear, I was saying for like this style.
Okay.
For like,
Because we're not trying, I'm not trying to set a precedent. And I don't think the board should be either, like, we should be looking at this as this. But I don't think for development of this style, we should at least make sure we're doing it to the best of our ability, so there is groundwork to go off of the future. And future boards, or whatever, if this comes up again, they can look to us and say, they did it right, let's just copy them. Instead of they're all fools, why they do it that way? And so we can do everything meet in our possibility. And I'm not finding, don't take that way. You know, us as a whole, we just gotta do our best.
I'm doing this, just to be very clear.
Well,
so one of the things,
it comes back to me if we're gonna not be in it.
But we're not making the decision on the precedent and on, in those codes right now.
Right.
Just this SPE we're talking
And
about.
I think it would be.
you're hoping it sets a
I was all
precedent
thinking
for the
that.
future,
Right.
that these kind of developments. So the interesting thing, and I apologize for interrupting, because I was kind of in the confusion spot where you are a while ago when I was reading through all the packet information. So at the end of the day, when you look at this PUD has commercial, multifamily residential. You're looking at a possibility of design for a pool feature, pickleball courts. You're looking at, this is a completely different beast than what you're looking at, your 150, 250 home development. So I'd say that at the end of the day, when we look at addressing one, we look at our community feedback survey. And one of the biggest things is people feel worried that we have no secondary water source. It was one of the things I've been super concerned about is we can't provide water to our residents if our main water system goes down. We have no backup. This is an idea where we're looking at one, providing that backup water service, but it's not costing us as a town anything. Our developers bringing in that secondary backup service as a requirement of the annexation agreement, our residents, this development and hopefully future developments, if more PUDs come in, get nothing but the benefit of having a secondary emergency backup for their non-pot system. It's not, I mean, but I would drink non-pot if it comes down to it, have no our water. But-
The real safety net, and that is worst case scenario. If we don't have this, we only have a worst.
Correct, and so you have an opportunity to address something that we've been talking about with our strategic plan and having secondary water sources or exploring those. But at the same time, looking at, this is a huge way to say, we want to work with you, but these are our extras in order to secure a future for the residents that are buying in that subdivision. Something that there are subdivisions on the east side of the interstate, I wish this would have been done for as well. It's unfortunate it wasn't, but this is a chance to move forward with the idea that if this works, a new precedent possibly could be set where developers know coming into this that there is this discussion of having that secondary source being made available. We have a developer telling us that it is a very good idea and it's going to cost him a lot of money to do so. And if you have a developer telling you that it's a very good idea and it's going to cost him a lot of money, it's one of those things that it makes sense to me to have this. So, and we're not monitoring, we have a requirement, but other than that, we're not requiring how that is delivered to said. It's just a requirement that's written in the agreement. We're not monitoring the secondary water source, are we?
But these are all these kind of.
These are high
questions that
level.
we can direct them to do. So it's like, he wants to do it, let's put it in the contract and let staff determine all the details.
We need direction with staff on how to.
So it'll be, there's already report.
And
I do support.
this for me is not gonna be, I'm not gonna say I'm gonna deny it because of this. I don't like it. Again, the reasoning behind it, the idea is good. Again, my issue comes down to, again, government overreach. And again, we talked about earlier, is my HOA treated the same as all the other HOAs? Well, if we're gonna require this to have this backup supplier, why are we not? And I'm not saying it's not a good idea, but now it becomes something we're now coming and saying you have to supply this water. And you also have to supply this other system, which again, that's gonna drive up the prices of homes.
It's an SPE, it's not HOA.
And it gets dicey.
Yes.
But again, to me, it's the whole issue. I think what should be happening is we're putting together an SPE. And Mr. Roberson comes to us and says, because I want this to be well, and he says, right, I want this to be good for generations to come. This is how I'm gonna set it up, and I'm gonna put this great. That's a positive. But there's a difference when we as a government entity say, you have to do this and use your money to do this. Again, this comes back to government overreach. Where do we draw the line?
Well, then
You have to do
at the
this, you
same
have to do
time,
that,
it's
and you
no
have to do
different
that.
than development pays its own way.
Right.
But
But it's also.
how is it development pays its own way?
Because if the development is gonna do an SPE, and they're required to bring in shares for a safety net, so that they don't have to go on to town water, which is our last worst case scenario, then that is development paying its own way for that worst case scenario. So we don't have to get to the worst case scenario. That makes
Well, I mean, with worst case scenario, people aren't just plugging in water and getting water, they're gonna pay for it. That's,
But, you get what I'm saying, though? Does that make sense?
Us as trustees,
you know, it makes sense. I just don't like us requiring it. But again, like I said, this is not for me a make or break. It's just, okay. If that's what the board wants, move forward with it. This isn't gonna be the issue for me that holds everything up. But but that's why I'm not.
So at this point, yes, Cody.
Thanks for that. No, you're fine. It was a good conversation. I wanted to throw in there too that this idea was kind of born out of some staff conversations internally about protecting risk to the town, kind of like the fees and, percentage thresholds and other things. We approach this from kind of a risk-based standpoint, and we had a recent example with Harvest Village where they came to the town saying, hey, our yards are drying up, we don't have any other alternatives, will you pay for this? And the town said, no, that's not what we're supposed to do. But the risk to the town was, because there was no secondary backup supply, the only way that they were going to keep their yards viable was to take on additional costs that they hadn't accounted for, or the town take on that responsibility. And even if the town had said, yeah, we'll take this on, we didn't have the water rights for it, we were still providing treated water, which would have been a big risk for the town. And even if we said no, and the HOA said, no, we're not going to figure this out, they would have been, have been using town treated water through their hose bibs, doing it under cover of darkness, all these other things. Yes, there's a way to see those things in the data on utility bills potentially if it's a large volume, but that's all risk to the town. And in this particular development, we're talking about a phase build out over 20-25 years. We don't know yet what those risks might look like for the town, and we wanted to provide at least an option for conversation of protecting the risk to the town and our utilities. And so we did support this idea, but I'll also throw out there, we don't know if that's 100%, if it's 61 estimated acre feet or whatever that number is. We don't know if it's 100% redundant supply. We don't know if it's, hey, keep 2 acre feet on container and the chance that your wells go down for a couple of days and you want to provide irrigation water. Those are the details that we still need to put some thought into and come up with what is the right volume of redundant supply. Is that volume of redundant supply phased over time where it goes up or down depending on the circumstances? Can that be amended at each phase of development approval? Those are the details that we don't have today, but we support from a staff level requiring a redundant water supply and identifying at least a starting point and then a path for how do we look at that at each development phase to make sure that number is still right and a good value to the developer, good value to the town, protects the residents. That's what we were coming from. So I hope that context kind of helps in terms of we don't know exactly how much it's going to be or the timing of it, but we think there's value in requiring something at time of annexation and then figuring out more details as we go.
I support you guys continuing that research.
Okay, thank you. And then the last question that we're seeking direction, I hope this is an easy one, and a softball. Does the board support any irrigation water for town parks and publicly owned open spaces be provided at no cost to the town?
They don't know that I do. What are we providing of value to them that, because again, right? All of these resources, I can fully develop that. I mean, yes, I understand where the government is. I'm always want to be talking about bills being my side, but at the same time, just because we're the government and we need to prove your thing to be able to come say you have to give us this for free for our properties, why would we not need to pay for it like everyone else does? That's
Will we be paying an HOA fee like we do for some of the other subdivisions?
You do? But I think.
Yes.
Most of the towns, it's contemplated the town would pay one membership due for a seat on the board, or on the membership to have access to records and one vote.
Got it. So would that be the same that we're looking at here? Are we a member of this HOA or are we simply just the town?
I think that would be at the development agreement stage where we're talking about HOAs.
Well, that's where I'm kind of trying to figure out where we sit in this question is if we.
We probably would request to be a member of an HOA. All of the HOAs, at least the master.
Again, the membership fee was different than the irrigation water. And I wasn't, so this question was going to be no fee whatsoever.
Right, no, but yes.
But for the irrigation supply and delivery to a town irrigation fund or a valve where we say this is our responsibility from this point forward, that the supply is insured for the town, that we're not paying a developer for the water that's already entitled to that land. And not paying an SPE fees for irrigation water for usage to irrigate town properties that have come. That was the question. Sorry if it was poorly worded.
How does it work for other developments?
All of our other development, I shouldn't say all because I haven't read every single word of every single one, but most of the town's development agreements currently require that if there's a non-pot irrigation system, that the irrigation system provides irrigation water for all of the park and open space areas, and the fees piece wasn't really contemplated outside of the membership dues to have access to financials and one vote on the HOA board.
So I guess not just the water, but how about maintenance, sprinkler heads, all those kind of things? If that's.
I'll answer generally, and then I'll defer back to Mr. Gowing, who has a little bit more history on operations. And I will start by saying that there's quite a variety of ways in which it was handled, and none of them were particularly good. And we want to continue to. Some of the challenges that I'm aware of is there's not clear separation between the HOAs physical infrastructure and where the town takes over responsibility. We want to do through design, have a clear separation of this is our point of connection, this is our valve, everything behind this valve is our responsibility to maintain, as opposed to trying to decide, is that your main line or our main line? Are we responsible for heads or are you responsible for heads? And we do too. And so pretty clear distinction is important to us from a design standpoint, which we review at each development phase. Mr. Guy, did you want to add anything from past experience?
Did it very well. Learners. That's 5 years. Right.
Right.
We're going to be a customer. It definitely puts us in a bit of a different stance. Right now, we're thinking more about future residents.
So my thought on that is that if we're not paying for water, then the residents of that community are paying for the water. For a public park, and I'm not okay with that, so I feel like we should pay a fair share for water, but the whole question of maintenance and those kind of things, or not necessarily maintenance, I feel like that should be something, but like any other infrastructure associated with it. I have questions on how you guys might want to set that up, so I'd just like to hear more.
I think we're gonna work it on the development agreement. I think we still need to fix one in Sage Meadows. Someone's predecessor, Brad, demanded that we dedicate the park to the town and all the maintenance.
Yeah.
And the town doesn't want the maintenance, so in Sage Meadows, we're actually mowing all that track between the train tracks and the houses. And maybe this is the same case. Maybe this is dedicated to the town, but yet the HOA maintains it. And the HOA is paying for the water to maintain it in that open space or something, because I don't think the town wants to incur the cost of maintaining all this open space, just like they don't want to do that in any developments, and that would be worked out in development.
So I'm open to you guys having a conversation, but I am not okay with requiring us to get irrigation water. Again, I'm the one that always is complaining about bills, but at the same time, if people are being charged to use this water, we're not providing the water, we're not helping them get the water, we're not providing water rights, they're using it like anybody else would. I'm not okay with us being like, well, because they're basically all the other residents in the neighborhood. The water that we're using. Now,
Right.
again, maybe the option is we work out an agreement that the HOA maintains the park and then we don't. So I'm okay with working out something to where the HOA maintains it and then however the HOA wants to work out the SB, that's between them. But I'm not okay with requiring that the town gets free water.
No, especially since we require the dedication of open space. So when we say you are required to give us so much of the land you're purchasing in an investment, then at the end of the day, when you're sitting there telling people that you're required to do this, but oh, we get it for free too, that's the catch and caveat. Now, as far as if we're looking at we are a customer, then us as a customer, we are paying into the same master association. So the maintenance would be included as a customer, I see. When you look at it, if you're a customer paying into that master association, we would be treated just like any other HOA or commercial provider. Now, I don't know how you set that up, whether you look at commercial pays more for some of that maintenance than what
So
residents would.
my question is, so we want every town resident to then pay for that versus the HOA?
Well, and so I guess,
What do we
yeah.
require?
Yes.
maybe I might,
Yeah, because we as a town choosing to have a park of X size, we choose to irrigate X amount of the park. That is, regardless of where it is, we're having this facility.
And the
And
public will be using it.
that is a different non-pot system setup than the other ones. The other ones, people just pay their yearly fee. There's not an ongoing cost.
I might kind of disagree with you guys on this. And the reason why I say this is because there is no raw water dedication, right? So I would say because you're not dedicating that raw water, yes, the park should be required to be watered at no cost. And I also say, the well has plenty of water, 400 acre feet, and we're asking for 60, well, 800 acre feet, we're asking for 60. The only cost, right, really coming back to the residents, then at that point is the delivery system with the gallons per minute that has to come in, right? So if all we're, the water then effectively is already there, why?
I think we should require
What is it for all other open spaces
the development
that's required?
wrong way.
But then does that mean that it's only private to that subdivision? Because it's a public entity, it's
No,
a public
no,
park.
this is just the water. So this is not the land. It's not the access to the park.
Yeah.
Yes,
I think the question was asked, how is this the same or different from some of our other parks and open spaces? The town typically requires the developer to dedicate the land. I would suggest that almost all of them, I say almost because I haven't reviewed every single development agreement that the town has, but in most instances, the town has required that the irrigation system, if it has a non-pot system, provide the irrigation water for the town, that the supply is ensured, that the system is viable to support the irrigation for the open spaces, and that there's a system put in place by the developer to irrigate that area, or at least get the water to that area, so the town can take all the irrigation and maintenance of the system for that piece. That all those agreements that I've reviewed, there's been no contemplation of the town paying anything for any of those park and open space irrigation pieces.
because we can't in one hand say, we don't want to put any more water burden on the residents. And then opt out and say, oh, no, we should pay for the water.
Wait, just real quick, I think that was part of the equation, like that was the system, how about that for water?
Right, so the other component there, when the town allows annexation and development of those properties through development agreements, those agreements have contemplated that in consideration of the town reducing the raw water requirement because there's water available, part of that consideration is that the town is also allowing that irrigation water to be used to irrigate the open spaces, which in fact ensures the town's viability, that there is water available for those open spaces. So that's, one of the protections that we view from the town side of things is that if we're taking on a 34-acre park that's intended to be used for open space and recreation spaces, that we have the assurance that there is, if it's an SPE, that they're going to provide that water to the town. And if the town future board says, you know what, we don't want to pay those fees, that park then has no water, no irrigation, and that's a risk to the town and its residents to be able to support the maintenance of that park. And we didn't want to put the town in a position where we may not have, or we have a private entity that's going to say, you know what, we're going to turn the water off. Yeah, we wanted to kind of future-proof ourselves from that possibility. We don't have any reason to believe that that's what, Mr. Roberson or this SPD would do. But if, we don't know what we don't know. And so ensuring the availability of the supply. The delivery of that is the systems, that there are main lines that could be pipes, could be ditches, whatever the right design turned out to be, that if irrigation well A is located at this location, and that's the water supply, and part B is located over here at location B, there's a connection point there that needs to be ensured. We'll plat easements for maintenance of that line if it's a town line, if it's a main line that's maintained by the master association or sub-association. We want to make sure that that maintenance is being taken care of, that the pumps are being maintained properly, that the town doesn't have to come back in and say, hey, these pumps are failing and the town gets water, so go ahead and fix that pump for us. We didn't want to be in that situation, and that's why we posed this question. I thought it was going to be a similar question, that we wanted to take on additional risk and additional costs, right? Or something that should come with the dedication of the land.
We don't pay for that well water in that case. So I think
It's fairly difficult when it's proposed on this project, developers allow their detention facility. That's a real benefit to the developer. So it's this kind of horse trade kind of thing that it's not very rigorous, but it has always seemed to come out fair.
So here's my perspective. If we're talking about, okay, we're allowing you to take what would normally take up another plot, you can build a house, you can put that on the open space. If we're saying as part of the reduction that you're getting for the non-pot system, right, instead of paying 31,000, you don't have to pay it. That's fine. If we're working that into something where it's like, okay, this is what we as a town are giving up in curing our water supply for future, I'm okay with that. If it's just straight up, we're the town, we're not paying for water, I'm not okay.
Right,
Yeah, so if it's literally like, okay, we're allowing you to do this and use some of our open space dedication for this, and we're giving you part of this reduction in non-pot system, and we can work out something in that that's agreeable to both entities, that I'm okay with.
Mhm.
What was worded here was just, we don't pay for water.
Right.
That, I'm not okay. Okay.
Right.
Okay.
So as
So,
long as
it
it's
comes back to precedence, I
amicable-
don't want to just be like, we're the town, we don't pay, yes.
So I'd say as long as it's an amicable agreement between Mr. Robertson and the town, and there's a balance that is used, then
Which you will okay and see.
yeah.
It's consistent with.
all agreed.
Yes.
Got there. Is there anything further on this item?
Thank you for having so much patience with our, and our questions. So I know it's a lot to take on when you deal with so many different minds and probably 1,000 different questions, so I'm grateful for you bearing with
You guys want to take a recess?
me.
Yeah, 5 minutes.
Well, we think it's good. Not even brought up.
Right.
Not enough time.
Not enough time. This was good. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. How you doing? Thurman? Good. Martina, you're not telling her hair's nice often enough, that sounds like?
Well, like, she's blonde, and then she dyes it blonde. I
Yeah.
don't know how good enough that.
Gotcha.
If she dyed a brunette, I'd notice
You're unmuted and recording there, Josie. You're unmuted and recording.
Perfect, okay, the next item on the work session, we clean up and prevent.
Due to the time, I think that last discussion was very productive, but due to the time, would you mind if we rearrange the next two items and move on to chapter 6, which is the third item on the agenda of chapter 2, I'm sorry, and chapter 10.
Yeah.
I think it could be a shorter conversation that we can wrap up in a short time, and if chapter 10, which is a large chapter, drags on and can't be completed, that's okay, we can still make some progress. I think we can complete it. Is that okay?
Yeah. Do it.
Okay, so jumping on to item number 3, this is the code cleanup. Code cleanup is the wrong word. This is a complete code rewrite of chapter 6, articles 1 and 2, which has to do with the issuance of building business permits in the town of Wellington. This was brought before the board on November 28th, and a few members on the board had some questions about a couple particular items. I made changes in the red line that's provided in the packet here, but also there was interest was provided by the board in just having some broader discussion about building permits. The questions on November 28th really had to do with denial of permits. So putting permits on probationary status or revoking permits for violations of state, federal, or local rules and regulations. One of the points that was brought up was that it shouldn't be the town's job to enforce state or federal laws or rules and regulations. Issuance of a building permit should be compliance with local rules. Trustee Wiegand brought up the very good point of if we cannot issue a building license or a business license for any business that violates federal law. That brings into an interesting question with regard to marijuana. So not to say it's the only solution to those questions, but certainly a solution to those questions was the red line that's in your packet removed all reference to federal and state laws. And basically the building permit is issued if the proposed business or the existing business complies with local law. And really it's about whether they comply with the town of Wellington. This takes out the question of federal marijuana. It takes out the question of state rules, in particular some public health rules that we reference. So that's the only change that I made with the red line.
I got one quick question. When we take out that wording as far as federal or the state, does that put us at legal responsibility? You know, somebody were to get injured, were to get hurt, could we get sued? Or are we
our liability for negligence would be there's the Colorado Governmental Immunity Act. Okay, there's a lot of immunity for town. I think the question for that sort of change though would be the town issues a business license for a illegal business, and the example of marijuana is an interesting one, but and it's hard to imagine what another completely illegal business would be, but
like a meth manufacturer.
like a meth lab, sure. So all of it would be that meth lab still can't operate in Wellington against state and federal law. I mean, the business license is not the gatekeeper to somebody legally operating a meth lab. But I think taking it out as the reason why you would revoke a license, it does change kind of the role of the clerk and town staff. Having that in there, what was in before, puts the clerk and town staff in the role of kind of being the enforcers for federal and state law. And it's not necessary. And that's the purpose of a business license isn't to be the police for all laws in the country on rules and regulations. It's about making sure that the business complies with town law, complies with the land use code, complies with our rules and regulations. Primarily land and building code, which is why I want Cody sitting up here as well. He has a lot of input on business license. So I don't think it makes a significant difference. I think it does clarify the role, and I think the concerns were valid in some something that hadn't occurred to me.
Make my part easy, I'm good with the changes, that was my concern. I know there were other concerns brought up, so I'd love to hear those, but from my standpoint, I'm happy with that, that was one of the things. I don't want us, state and federal can enforce their own rules.
Yeah.
Because then again, right, then that's so much more that we've got to be thinking about, to just keep it easy, we deal with ourselves, and other people can do their own thing with it.
And just since we also didn't have an opportunity to talk about kind of how the process works, I'm happy to kind of run through how we're envisioning this, if it's working, and I've looked a lot of deep on this.
I know there probably isn't the place to even ask this, but on the marijuana thing, where's the limit on that? I mean, hashes, I mean, the potency and all this type of stuff. What, do we have any restriction on, is it just straight marijuana? Can they go to the next step or what?
It's very, very controlled, and there's a maximum, weight limit that you can purchase at any one given time, and they check.
Right, but as far as the
Well,
potency and all that type of
THC
stuff.
content is controlled as well. It's under 0.3%. They classify as, is it hemp or CBD?
Oh,
No, I'm talking about,
No,
So you're
so
talking
I
about
don't think,
you're talking about like marijuana versus like.
no, but I'm talking about getting it up to the next level.
Yeah,
Like hashes, like mainlining the stuff.
and things.
We,
What? Well, you got some of the potency of it now, I guess is pretty, I mean, back in my days,
Oh,
it
yeah.
was 3 or 4%. Now it's 80%. Right, no, but I mean, I'm just asking about that. You can have, is there any limitations
Colorado
on
rate that.
it?
We don't.
That's all.
We don't rate, yeah.
Okay,
They have to scan, from what I understand, they scan plants and test it for the amounts and have to identify what the percentage is in Colorado. So,
okay.
but that's nothing the town is even allowed to get.
All that's all.
State does all that.
Yep.
just regulated.
As much as that.
I mean, three questions.
Is,
I can send you some resources on that. I'm not, there's a lot of.
Any other questions from the board?
I like it, but I'd love to hear the flow of the process,
The
just so I can visualize.
This all starts with the application, and that's something that Ethan and his office have been working on diligently. Want to make sure we collect as much information. Part of that is, do you comply with these specific parts of the town code? Where, your business hours and that sort of thing. Part of the word, do you comply with these specific portions of the town code, has to do with home occupation. Because are you a home occupation? If you are, I think it's, do you comply with this? Yes.
Yeah.
If no on any of these things, that kind of raises a red flag.
Then they're aware of them too, because they have no idea, I'm sure.
They sign an affidavit, or it's an affidavit, a sworn statement on it saying, I swear this is true. And the intent is for that approval to be largely administrative. And so Ethan will take a look at the application, and checks all the boxes. We'll file that. He'll approve the application, and they'll be issued a business license. If they fail to check one of those boxes, he has to give them a written denial letter saying this is the reason why you have been denied a business license. Previous code and a lot of other towns they suspend the licenses for first violations and things, and I changed that language to put them on probationary status because I didn't like the idea of suspending means suspending business and stopping business. And so I thought that didn't kind of mesh with what we're trying to do with this. And so instead, put them on a short probationary status, and the intent there is to give some time for the town to work with them to bring them into compliance. If they don't come into compliance, then the town clerk has the authority to revoke their business license. Then they can, basically, then they would have to reapply, proving that they had met the requirements or ceased the thing that caused the revocation. It is very, on the back end, after it's been approved, there's always a process for any, planning and building department to raise concerns, like, hey, saw this business, it doesn't meet these things. That's where they would send a letter perhaps or to the town clerk, who would then put them on probationary status. whoa, this thing is done, this should be. Penalties for violating this will be sent to the court, so operating a business without a business license. That, of course, is not something we really want. We don't want to revoke licenses, and we don't want to send people to court for operating businesses without. What we want to do is bring them into compliance. What we want to do is get them licenses on the front end to make sure they stay up. So it's largely intended to be administrative. The reason we did a complete rewrite is our old code was quite frankly unintelligible. Many times where I would read it and read the exceptions and the rules for what happened at what time, I would have to read it about 5 or 6 times, and even then, I can't say that I always interpret certain words. So it just needed to be redone. I think there's some other parts of it. So that's kind of the overview of what we're trying to do here.
Real quick, maybe I'm misreading something here, but on page 55 of that, number 4 up there at the top, you still have it is aware of the federal, state, and local. You did not get that
No,
corrected?
this-
Or,
So it's a different section. So this is the new section.
okay, that is,
Yeah, that was the packet that was provided before. I wanted to make sure you have everything.
okay,
I
perfect,
got confused too.
okay,
So,
perfect. I just
the-
wanted to make sure that it didn't get put in their budget.
No, the red line copy that you see is the first,
Okay.
like the first adjusted ordinance. That's the one you should be.
Yeah, and I apologize. On the digital form, if you look at the bookmarks on the PDF, it says ordinance and old packet material. It's a little clearer.
Yep.
So, and then, but it ends, Steve, on page 51.
Okay.
And I think this is something that we may revise again. I mean, this is, since it's a rewrite, I think what we want to do is get a process in place that works now. And we can use and we can start using. I think already we're discovering, we're thinking about issues with building compliance. So I would expect it to come back in a year or something to fine tune. We want to make sure it's works for staff, it works for businesses, it works for everybody. It's really a key part where the county rules businesses.
So I haven't seen anything that is against this, but I just wanna see, has the chamber provided any feedback on like the flow or like the process of obtaining? That might be something I would recommend. And then I just wanna make sure that nothing in it, and nothing could ever be perceived or considered subjective or political associated with granting business license. So I know we're still very careful with that for like hub grants and stuff like that. It's not up to our opinion, and it provides proof and requirement, but we don't get to decide personally how we feel about that business. And I know that that's gonna be the outcry from the community of we're doing this purposely, right? To avoid businesses we don't want in Wellington. That will be the response. Just everybody probably agree with it. That's what people will say and think. So I just want to make sure we're so safeguarded against that we can deny that by all means, that is not the intention or capability of any of the licensing efforts. So that was my only feedback, but I like it as is, and I feel good about it.
I have reached out to the chamber a couple different times and have requested feedback, which I have not received.
Okay,
So
I might plan to reminder.
I do at each meeting. I attend their chamber meetings every month.
Yeah, okay.
So I will do that again.
So the only thing that I noticed that was in the previous one section, page 60, the 6150 exempt activities. I don't see any exempt activities listed in the new. Are you guys just striking that completely? Page 60,
And in which section?
the exempt activities, 6150.
In the new 6220 license required, the only exempt activities that we're including at this stage are nonprofit corporations are exempt. And I think that was in the original one on page 60, Get back up to that.
It says, such as, so a licensee shall not be required, a license shall not be required of persons performing professional services within the town who are licensed by the state, such as physicians, dentists, lawyers, accountants, and engineers. And I'm not saying I'm for or against it. All I'm saying is that let's make sure that we're notifying,
Those that don't, that
these that are listed early on to,
And that's, with a complete rewrite, and one of the reasons I have in here probationary status and all these other things, we have, the town will not be knocking on their door in 30 days saying you don't have a license. I mean, there's a long kind of implementation process.
commercial work on the website.
Yes, but I think that's I think that's.
yeah, I just want to make sure that I mean, cause this is a lot of higher ups that probably bring a good amount of stuff to our town.
Yeah.
Not that every business doesn't, but you know, it's.
I'm not sure why these were exempted for business licensing. I mean, I have to have a business license. Business license, I operate a business. So our intent was to be as inclusive as possible, but in requiring everybody to get a business license, we also want to make sure that the process is not so onerous. It's a more time than needs to.
So,
The only one is a good point.
okay. The only one that's exempt is nonprofits.
No.
That was part of the old, I'm on the
Right.
page, that's part of our existing business licensing code today, was the exempted, okay, thank you.
So like a roofer comes in during a storm, they need to be licensed.
Performing
Yes,
services in-
preferably, that's for sure an example that we don't have.
That's a
Yeah.
performing business in the town.
On that topic, I mean, one of the questions that has come up that I'm not sure we completely answered yet is where a business license is required versus where a contractor license is required. Or a contractor license might also satisfy a business license, but a general business license wouldn't qualify as a contractor license. There's some different nuances there from a workflow and review standpoint as to what materials we're collecting, what we're requiring for review, and what we are actually allowing them to do with that license that we need to work out. It could be a workflow on the town's internal side, maybe a simple clarification like adding contractor licenses as a new article behind 3%, to just clarify that contractor licenses are required as a result of the building code enforcement. But we identify in here that you still need to obtain that license and make it clear so that any operator of the town can look at the code and know what to do with it and who to send it to. So there's some clarifications I think are simple, though I haven't had a chance to get this big. And I think I've missed, I think, 2 board meetings in the last 6 years that I've been here. And this first presentation of this was one of them. So my apologies for that. Not being on top of that, but there were a few other questions that we wanted to kind of get woven into the amendment and possibly just the workflow on the backside, to make sure it's clear on the staff side, who's doing what.
Well, and I would say the thing I would also encourage is looking at the cost of the business license versus contractor licensing. As a contractor, when you get licensed, because I know that one's set at 50, and then regular business licenses are set at 25. So when you look at it, the coming in from a contractor's perspective, you already have to pay fees for the state. You pay fees for county, and you also pay the regular, you have to go through verification processes. I can look online in 2 seconds and see that you are licensed and able to operate as an electrician, a plumber, a dentist, a doctor, a nurse, that kind of stuff, that's already there and easily accessible. So do we really need to look at $50 in cost? Or is it something that you can still say they might require some extra documents, but do we want to really do $50 and then $25 for a business license and then 50 for a contractor's license? That's where you kind of start looking at, is it an even cost when a contractor's license is actually more easily verified by simply hopping on a department state. They have to register and license through that entity, or you cannot operate in that position. So that's something I would recommend as far as the cost entailed of the 2 separate fees.
And that's a fair point. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Cody. It's okay.
I think it's a fair point, and it's certainly something that we thought about when we recommended fees for contractor licenses. Keep in mind that what's afforded to a contractor through that application process looks at different elements than a business license is looking at. And also grants the contractors access to our software where they have access to do permitting online and other things that normal homeowners don't get the same blanket access to. There's different elements that we're looking at that for the fee setting, which wasn't part of the code process. But we're certainly, yeah, but it's certainly a good point, and we definitely don't want to, miss the boat on things. What we also don't want to do is pile on fees and say that a contractor needs to get a contractor's license at that fee and a business license at this fee. That's not our intent, but we also recognize that some of our contractors have both a physical presence, but have a business location subject to a business license, as well as a contractor license when we're reviewing different things from a building code perspective, where it might be necessary to look at, does that have both fees applied, or do we just make a blanket statement that to be business friendly, if you have a contractor's license, we'll review both the contracting component and your physical presence component under one fee and make sure that all the procedural boxes are checked for both, satisfying both concerns.
Well, you have to think,
I like that.
we also pay for building
Like that.
permits. Well, no, because you have to look at all the extra fees that contractors pay in permitting and taxes and fees. So we don't just pay a $50 fee, you also pay a permit fee. And that should be cost recovery in that permit fee to help handle that extra stuff on the business, on Town of Wellington's side of planning. We already have permitting fees and everything that should be covering the software and additional costs. It's actually Wellington is one of the only entities that actually charges for a contractor's permit in general. So, and we can access City of Fort Collins,
Permit or like
a license.
a license?
So, because you can access the software that we're adopting now to go on and register for permitting and stuff like that has been in use in multiple municipalities for years already. The community court. So my question is do you really, since those costs are already seen in the building permit fees and extras on that side, do you treat them any different than any other business coming in to do business? They actually bring a large amount of sales tax revenue with them, because if they're having all of the contracting equipment and stuff like that delivered to a home in town, do we really want to chase off contractors by charging additional costs on top of what they already pay in general?
Certainly things we can look at. I don't think the fees are related to the code that you're looking at tonight, but we'd be happy to continue to look at those things and make those recommendations.
Well, no, because what you had talked about is looking at who do you look at as exempt or anything like that. So that's what I'm saying. If you guys are looking at it, addressing it, things so it doesn't have to come up at a later date, then that's definitely something where all businesses are treated equally. The business license. No,
Contractors from,
no, that all businesses should be treated equally. Like at the end of the day, if a nail salon goes in and applies for a business license, it's $25. If a bar goes in and applies for a business license, it's $25.
What you're saying is you want the contractor fee to be
Equal.
combined with business license and cost $25. Is that the summary?
Yep.
Okay,
Equally.
let's talk about fees another time, but I think that's good.
and I think, especially with, as Cody was talking about kind of workflow, and we're gonna figure out some interrelations between contractor licensing and business licensing. Sure. Patty's committed to fee review. I mean, we review the fee schedule all the time. So I think that's something to brought up another time. This ordinance that we're proposing, I don't think it'd be the time to.
This
That's
pertains
pretty
to
good,
business
right?
licensing.
I don't think it'd be the time to do a fee change at that time, but I think it's certainly something we keep looking at as, and especially for period on review.
Yeah. For effort required. But it makes sense that would be fun to acknowledge whether or not they need to or are being considered.
Yeah, create the clarity so anyone looking at it knows what it's.
Yeah, they don't think they're dumb.
Trustee, there's a home occupation, we're asking tell us their planned hours, but we're not.
There's restrictions.
There are restrictions within the land use.
Yep.
And part of the application is I know what those are.
Those restrictions apply
only apply how much.
Well, occupation, because they live in, well, gee, I guess.
There are different, in the land use code, there are different business types that have different established hours of operation, and they change based on use and context. A lot of the home occupations are geared around the residential character and setting of those subdivisions. Some of the commercial districts have different hours of operation, a little bit later in the night, things like that. I think, yeah, and I think in this context here, the way it was intended was to identify that they have read and understand that there are rules. There's affirming that they've read that and are aware of it. Is the way it was presented. I didn't mean to steal.
Oh, that's okay. The comments I were going to make were largely related to the structure of chapter 6 as a whole. But they also were tied to Trustee Teets's fees comments. And I think that's a bit beyond the scope for what's before you this evening. So I'll just sort of set those comments aside and maybe bring them back.
Good.
I guess I'd like to see other recommendations from Cody, and then, I'm good to go.
Recommendations regarding which piece?
I don't know, I see a lot of notes, that's all I'm thinking.
I'm like, I feel like he's got some more that he wants to share with us at some point.
This has been a moving target, and what I task staff with is, I need this simple. I need this to be clear for our residents.
Yeah.
So however that needs to happen, I need that to happen. I don't need a business waiting 30 days for their license.
Right.
I set up like, this is what I don't want, and this is what I do want.
Yeah.
So I feel like we're so close to getting there. We've got a meeting, Cody, Ethan and I have a meeting later this week to go over flow again, and look at that process again. The application itself is looking great. I got the latest and greatest from Verity, who sits at our front desk, who has created this document, and she's done a great job with Ethan's help. So I think we're really close, really close. So we'll finalize that. And like I said, the goal was to make this a clean and clear process for our businesses and take away some of the questions that they seem to have when they're going through our business licensing.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the questions that most people probably have are like specific business related, but that's covered in this because, you know, it requires that they acknowledge all the code pertaining to crime. So that way we don't have to include that in the business licensing piece. It just says that it's been acknowledged and agreed to. So whatever is applicable. So I think that's great.
Will you plan on sending a link in the application to the land use code so they can read, like, direct where it goes?
We can certainly do that. The form that exists currently does make references to the land use code. But I believe that would be wise. I will say, I think that community engagement and education on this whole process with business licensing is going to be a significant effort. Like, as Dan mentioned earlier, I don't believe that, you know, we'll be able to just stamp the ordinance and then the next day have 1,100 business license applications or whatever, if you will. I think the community engagement piece there is going to be very important. So I certainly believe staff, though, is committed insofar as we're physically possible or physically capable of accomplishing that aspect of this too. So.
Well, it's a great form that they're creating to provide that knowledge and education and engagement. So, I mean, that's what they've been begging for, and now you're creating the form in which to do that. So I think that's lovely.
So the newest form that I'm looking at now, I mean, if it's an electronic form, it does have links to the different code sections. Okay. Do you have other locations in Wellington? Separate application is needed, and the code section is linked. All throughout here, it looks great. I mean, I like the fact that it has a link to the fire code. I mean, just all the different pieces. The zoning map, assuming that so people can assure that they're in the right zone.
Probably had no idea.
Yep. So there's links to everything. So
Is this a link that has not launched?
Correct. It's a draft product.
it is a work product. That's why I have not sent it anywhere because it's still a work in process. But
Well, I'm clarified.
Yeah, I appreciate you adding the zoning too, because that can get really confusing. But honestly, as it sits now with the adjustment that was made for, I'm assuming legality reasons, that we're not writing out marijuana shops from our town. I would support, if this were to come back, I would support this coming back to us as is, if it helps you guys progress moving forward.
Yeah, this is great. My one thing is, are you guys considering churches a nonprofit? Okay. Because it is separate in the old ordinance.
The old ordinance spelled out a lot, yeah, but yes, church is a nonprofit entity.
Okay, perfect.
Very similar to.
I just want
They have to be a
to.
nonprofit corporation. They don't have to be-
Yeah, they don't have to actually be a
The
nonprofit.
church is a nonprofit.
But a nonprofit in general. Can work.
And if they're exempt from the business licensing, that doesn't exempt them from zoning and building codes and other things. There's other things that would need to be looked at.
Yeah.
Okay.
What about the appeal process? One of my notes on this is a question, my apologies, I wasn't able to ask staff earlier, but the way I read it, it appears that the decision is made by the clerk, and then if there's an appeal, the clerk hears the public hearing, or the hearing on the appeal. I didn't know if that was intended or if it was a drafting.
That was intended, actually. There's an initial, very quick appeal of a decision that is made to the clerk as the hearing officer. And so it's a very fast administrative appeal. Immediately after that, it can be appealed to board of trustees. And so it keeps in place the final appeal to the board of trustees. But I wanted to have at least an intermediate stage of an appeal to somebody. And it is interesting, but it's not uncommon. He makes the decision, but then here's an appeal. And basically that allows the applicant to create a record. It allows them to make their argument, and he could be persuaded, or he could say, no, I followed the rules for these reasons. And then that decision can be appealed. So, but the intent, it's very fast. The turnaround for that first appeal is good.
I will agree to that as long as we are stressing to each applicant that's denied that even if you appeal, that there is still a secondary appeal process to the board of trustees. Because I don't want to discourage someone when they hear, nope, it's been denied for an appeal. Then people are like, oh, okay, well, there's my final denial. I want to make sure that people know and understand they still have an option after the town clerk. So whether that's a notice that's included in the application saying you have additional options after your initial denial, I'd like to see that go into that as well.
So just say when there's a letter for denial. That's included
Yeah.
in your entire process. It's only relevant to you if you get denied. Only denied doesn't matter. Get denied, here's your process. Spells out each step.
But I don't want it to be in small fine print on the back of a, like, you know, a
Like
car
a sales
sales,
law.
like a car sales contract where all of the really important stuff is on the back side down at the bottom. I'd like it to be very well noted, that people have additional options for those.
Any denial, any revocation, any suspension needs to be in writing. I think that'd be a perfect place to.
Perfect. Yep.
Okay.
Good.
On forward.
Okay. Next real quick. Chapter 10. It's been a while since we brought this one to you. That was back in July, and I said at that time that it wasn't necessarily, it might not come back to you too quick. It's hoping before January, but here we are. Chapter 10 is the general offenses of the town of Wellington, criminal code. Not everything in it is criminal, but it's a good way to think of it. It's code. It's been put together over 40 years or something like that, of adding little bits and pieces here, some stolen from other towns, some taken from Colorado revised statutes. There is an incredible inconsistency in the language. There's an inconsistency in the levels. There are certain offenses it actually says this is a type 2 offense, and it doesn't have a type 2 offense and a type 3 offense, but it says that in places. There's no difference in how we sentence. Yet somebody added that code section. So this project started as an intent to kind of clarify, to make this section uniform. So that's a lot of the changes. There's a lot of red lines in there that have, the intent is to have no substantive effect on the laws that they change. There's a lot of changes in there where there were whole sections are repealed. Those are repealed for a number of reasons. The intent was repealing items that were, one, unenforceable, two, have never been used, or three, haven't been used in a really long time. The example I gave back in July was the use of slugs. That's the tampering with a vending machine. We're not writing anybody into municipal court for use of slugs. So let's just get that off the books. It's actually still a state crime. So if the Monroe County Sheriff's officers catch somebody, we can send them to district court and let the district court deal with slugs. The town of Wellington doesn't necessarily need to. So some of those were intended to be like technical fixes, I'll say. I mean, some have a substantive effect, but I'll call them most. But then there were two real big substantive changes I wanted to make. One is removing jail time as a penalty for violation of municipal code. Currently, the town has the ability to, municipal court has the ability to sentence somebody to up to 364 days in jail, just shy of a year, for a number of offenses, and in fact, any criminal offense in the town of Wellington is spelled out in one of the sections. These are the criminal offenses. Those can be fined up to $2,640 and up to 364 days in jail. I can't tell you the last time this town municipal court sentenced somebody to jail. But keeping it on the books as that's a potential penalty requires the town to, one of our line items is public defender, defense counsel. If jail is possibly a penalty and somebody is indigent, the town has to fund their legal defense. And they can ask for a jury trial and the town has to pay for it. If jail is not a penalty, the town does not have to fund their legal defense. If your maximum penalty is a fine, the town doesn't have to fund the legal defense. I can't tell you the last time we had a trial where this was an issue, but it's an item that just has to stay on the books, and it's something that's very unpredictable. Because it hasn't been used, because there's a downside on the budget, it seems to make sense to eliminate jail as a possibility. That's not to say that somebody in the town of Wellington gets to do all of these things, say, I can never go to jail for this, because we have district court. There's a reason that we have the district attorney's office to prosecute crimes where jail is a potential penalty. And the reason the town doesn't sentence people to jail is the offenses that come to municipal court basically are picked by the Monroe County Sheriff's Office. If somebody should go to jail, they write them into district court because there's a process where they can keep them there, where they can appear in court for an arraignment from jail. If it's a relatively minor offense, they're going to write them into municipal court. And the idea of writing them into municipal court so that the town can handle the kind of lesser penalties or the lesser violations. Not to say they're not important, but it's actually to say that the town might be in a better position to handle them in a more productive way. It's a lesser violation, so we don't need the hammer of jail as a possible penalty. We have creative other tools in our tool belt. So one of the goals here was to remove jail. That requires changes to Chapter 10, which are included. What isn't included in your packet is it would also require changes to Chapter 1, Article 4, Chapter 8, and Chapter 7. That's penalties for violations. It's kind of a general administrative section. It's one section covering the model traffic code, because there are parts of the model traffic code where the possible penalty of that is jail. Want to remove that reference. In Chapter 7 is regard to vicious animals and dangerous dogs. And it's just a place where if you violate Chapter 7, you can go to jail. Well, I just remove that. The intent for the ordinance that we presented ultimately. So that's the first goal, is remove jail time. My goals of writing this. The second one is I'd like to add a section, whether it's in Chapter 10 or elsewhere, regarding collection. Currently, the town of Wellington does not authorize collections for its municipal court, or I believe for other town budgetary issues. What happens a little too often is the town, in particular, we'll talk about, say, traffic offenses. Somebody comes, gets brought into court, except they don't come. They get their ticket or their summons and they don't show up. we can default them, or the court will issue a default that goes off to the DMV and they get points against their license. And then the town imposes its regular fine, its default fee, its court costs, you know, it imposes all these fines, and then that goes in a stack of papers. Because we don't have anything in our code allowing us to pursue collections, such as like I said, it does go to the DMV, so there's the effect on the license, and if we see them again, right, we bring it up. It'd be a rather simple code change, a small section added in there authorizing the town to use collections for municipal code violations, and we'll also bring in perhaps other, you know, town collections activities. The way it would work is the town would contract with a collections firm and pay them X%. And it doesn't really make sense for the town to expend the fund itself to go after these, especially with some of these traffic code violations. The fines and costs total, say, $200. That's a bulk of business, so you want to hire a firm that can take care of that quickly. We think it'd be a better way to lead for. And allow actual penalties imposed by our court to be enforced. The town would pay a percentage, but we would get, of course, at least more than $0, which is what we get. So that was my intent. That was what I was shooting for and working on. And I've taken this to, I've had people in my old office, law clerk, go through it a number of times. I've been through it a number of times. I've sat down to go over this a number of times with Laramie County Sheriff's Office to get their feedback. I wanted their feedback on what are you using? What wouldn't you ever enforce in the town of Wellington? Or I shouldn't say wouldn't enforce, but wouldn't write into this. So some of the items that have been stricken out are things that they said, well, I'm never writing that into municipal court. They're going to be written, that's going to go to district court. So I've run this by a lot of folks. The point tonight is I want feedback. Because this is the criminal offenses of the town of Wellington, this is the police power of the town in writing. I made a lot of technical changes and brought them to the board and said, here's a rewrite in a meeting without a work session. I would expect there'd be a lot of conversation. And so I wanted to, this is, I don't have any real specific questions. I want to know if there are items that you have questions about, you know, items you have concerns about, things you want added, removed, etc. Trustee Cheats had asked a question about concealed carry. So I'm happy to address that. Or open carry?
Yeah. What's the definition of knowingly display a deadly weapon? What's display?
The same thing marked.
Brandishing.
Well, no, brand,
That's
that's different.
Brandishing is an actual thing.
So where is open carry? What's the
It's on, I have the page, hold on.
6, section 10, 6, 10, page 20.
24, yeah, number 5.
10,
10, 6, 10, 5, not being a peace officer, display a deadly weapon in a public place except when engaged in lawful target practice or hunting. I understand 6.
So, but
Yeah.
Yep.
The manner calculated to the law.
I
But the
100% agree with you.
thing is that, in my opinion, and that's one of the things that I had marked down, is it's subjective. So honestly, someone can walk with an open carry and someone that is not comfortable with guns can call the police and turn someone in because they feel alarmed just because this person
Well, it
is
says in a
carrying.
manner to calculate, it does say in a manner to calculate it.
That's it.
Alarm.
Five doesn't include that.
Five does not include, 6 does.
But
5 is just target practice for hunting. So I mean, what if you have a shotgun in the back window of your truck?
Mhm.
Is that a display?
The
And
display
it's
is
not currently in the act.
Sure. And the other issue too is if I'm walking down the street and like Trustee Daly said, you're open carrying, I think you're allowed by far a lot of carry. You're technically displaying a firearm.
Yeah. The display word is fine.
Yeah, that's like brandish would make sense. Yeah.
5 needs to go.
Yes, I would agree. I don't think, but I understand 6. I don't, yeah, I agree with Trustee Daly. I don't like 5.
And deadly weapon is defined in Article 9.
Yes.
But I don't think that changes any of
No, it
the
doesn't.
points. I just want to make sure.
And again, if you want to say brandish, that's fine, because there's a difference, like a brand, right, yes, if I have a firearm and I'm holding it out, that's a totally different story. But if it's, crossed across my back.
They get rid of the 5.
Yeah, because what
Get
happens
rid
if
of
you're
five.
just holding out a gun, displaying it to someone you know, and someone takes that defensively or the wrong way?
Right,
Then
I think brandishing would be covered under that calculated to.
Yeah.
Yeah, so 6 covered, so 5, I would agree, I think 5 should go.
Yeah, I'm just saying, if you don't like the calculated to alarm, we should maybe change the wording to brand, I don't know the legal definition of brandishing.
I think
I'll look at that one.
going-
I think, one of the reasons it might be used is part A says it's unlawful to intentionally, of course. The word at the end though is reckless. And so I think there might be oh, I know. I'm aware.
Yeah.
I think it might work with recklessly, but let me take a look at that, and I think that's very legitimate concern.
I'm fine with 6 the way it is, I'm just saying that if you don't like that, maybe we change the word to brandishing and add that in 6 to. But again, I don't know. I'm okay with it as it is for 6, but 5, I agree, yeah, that just needs to be.
I think display is clear as opposed to brandishing. I like 6 as language clarity wise, but I'm happy to take a look at it. I appreciate that for pointing that out.
Number 3 would not qualify under just a noise ordinance of some sort, make a reasonable noise in a public place where you're private.
And how do
Just
you-
makes it a.
Like a
The noise ordinance would be enforced by the code compliance officer. This would really be Laramie County Sheriff's Office.
define unreasonable noise.
That's a very subjective one, and that's
So
something.
that's the problem, is can we make it to where it's a decibel level? I mean, it's measurable. Decibel levels are measurable. But at the same time,
I had that conversation with Laramie County Sheriff's Office about
So-
decibel meters, and they find them to be terribly unreliable and hard to use, and this is enforceable. Unreasonable noise, unreasonable, we can,
so fireworks,
that's covered in another section.
but it's also in this one too.
And
So-
absolutely,
Get multiple violations.
Absolutely.
But no, at the same time, we've been told multiple times that officers severely struggle to enforce this because there are so many that are lit off all over everywhere.
We can't prove who's doing it.
Exactly. So unreasonable noise in a public place or near a private residence, define that, because that is subjective. What if someone hires a band and a band is playing in someone else's backyard?
I had the police come to my mother's 67th birthday for that very reason.
Downtown residents that are literally backing residential properties, where I think we have one that's talking about hosting live events, weddings, stuff like that. What happens when neighbors start complaining in the backyard that they don't like the sound of the music? So define, that's what I'm saying is,
That's why they get permitted for events.
And I think as you're highlighting unreasonable noise here, there's a whole other section, 10 that is unreasonable noise. That's the entire section. What you're looking at is disorderly conduct. So I think
Public,
if
no, I'm-
you're concerned with unreasonable noise as a concept.
no,
I can look
Article
at it.
6 is public peace, order, and decency.
I know, section 10.
On page 44, it goes into further detail on unreasonable noise.
It's a whole separate section. So, 10.6.10.3 is just disturbing the peace. Yeah, I mean, it's all, it is somewhat subjective, but it's
It's
very
completely
enforceable.
subjective.
I think it's the important part. It doesn't limit how it can be taken to court or be
No, but
enforced.
it makes a lot of calls to our local law enforcement on someone that might not just like the sound of your lawnmower going off at 8 a.m. So that's kind of where that catch and caveat comes into play.
Unreasonable doesn't necessarily limit itself to volume either. It could be the nature of the sound, the frequency, periodicity, or
The
periodicity,
time of day.
time of day, and there's a lot of different things beyond just the volume.
Yeah.
And I think I would trust the unreasonable definition to be used by a police officer. After multiple warnings at your grandma's birthday or whatever. Unless you guys just really know.
It was a
this
big-
company.
It was a good party.
Well, it just says that it is unlawful to make, continue, or cause to be made or continue any unreasonable noise.
I think if you're uncomfortable with unreasonable noise as a undefined thing, I could look into clarifying that.
How to better define it, because like that
You want
is,
to narrow the scope, which it can be argued in court.
yes, because at the same time, if I work out in my yard at 8 AM gardening and my neighbor doesn't like it because they want to sleep until noon, they're gonna continually call to report unreasonable noise. How many offenses happen before they have to enforce
They
it?
don't, the LCSO, I mean, again, that's an example, like, the knowing Sergeant Shooting LCSO, they're gonna just tell that person, like, sorry, deal with it, they're not, they're, and that's, it comes back to some level of, we're relying at that point on the, professionalism. I would just say we're relying on our law enforcement officers to be able to make that determination of what is and isn't, because the other side of that is, if we start to put like a decibel meter or something on that, one, they have to be trained to use it. Two, they've got to make sure it's calibrated, which is now going to drive up our costs to LCSO because they have to get new equipment. They have to make sure they're training the equipment. They have to make sure the equipment stays up. And then if the equipment fails and if, right, that's the whole thing, right? You get a speeding ticket with a speed gun and they don't have everything calibrated and everything, then it gets thrown out in court, even though you measured it objectively. If there was an issue with that measurement.
And as Cody said, unreasonable includes a lot of things that aren't just decibel level, and so
Right,
we would have to spell out all of those. And so
Right.
if we want to define,
Better to have a broad stroke than a
the
narrow
broad
focus.
stroke gives flexibility in the process to enforce the intent, as opposed to saying between these hours, these decibels, except when, and not related to lawn care, and so that it gets
but it
into.
also opens up a can of confusion and argument saying, well, I didn't know, or I don't find this offensive.
Sure,
or-
absolutely,
Yeah.
So,
and that's what would be argued in
That's
court.
the judge, that's the judge's job then to determine and say, no, that actually is, right, LCSO makes the judgment call, we feel that this is unreasonable, they write the sentence. Now it's up to the judge to hear your case as to why this was completely reasonable, and if the judge agrees with you, congratulations, your case gets thrown out. If the judge is like, no, that is unreasonable, then that's the whole point of the process.
And there's also the prosecutors in the middle there as well.
Oh, yeah.
Because I will have to look at tickets that come before us, for unreasonable noise, and the first thing I have to look at is, did I get a conviction on it? And so I have to look at all the circumstances, and if LCSO came to me with somebody starting their lawnmower at 8 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday as a reasonable noise, I would have a hard time objectively saying, yeah, I can definitely get a conviction on this, or should I? I mean, so there's a couple steps. But if we limit it, it actually would, I think, make the code, like I said, I think we would have to spell out the time of day, the type of noise, the volume of noise, the tool that has to be used to measure the noise. I mean, and so all laws like this, there has to be a balance between enforceability and clarity, and we have to just say that I think unreasonable noise is sort of a community standard, and it's vague. But
I don't like the gray area, maybe that's what bothers me.
and I'm happy to look into.
Well defined, so I know how to safely stay within them without breaking the law, or having to even be confronted by an officer saying I possibly infringed.
And I have notes on this, I'm happy to,
Yeah.
this is not the last step in this process, so I would like, maybe we move on from unreasonable noise, and I will take some notes and I'll get back to you on that. I think it can be clearer without, I would like it to be clearer without going into the weeds on.
I have to apologize for laughing earlier. It wasn't based on that conversation. It was just something else I was reading in here that made me giggle. I just want to make sure you guys know that that wasn't free. Sorry. Because I was imagining the crowd.
So my one recommendation is transitioning the cigarette use from 18 to 21. Cause in yours it says 18. And it's 21 now to purchase or possess.
Yeah, for tobacco in the state of Colorado.
Yep. It's
Yeah,
been
I'm
apparently. it's been
January-
that way.
I haven't been involved in anything related to cigarette lighting in a long time.
It's been that way for
Yeah.
years. I honestly didn't know that, so. Right. Well, it didn't know that. That's 2 years ago.
It changes that, some of the changes in here, I wrote about 3 to 4 years.
Yeah.
So actually,
Back in the day.
so I've been working on this a long time, and that's one that my brain, cigarettes are 18, but thank you.
Obviously, we're talking. So the other one is burning.
Which section?
So it's page 45, section 10, 11, 20. We're pretty much removing people's abilities to have fire pits.
Yep.
Cause it includes wood.
Anything non-commercial.
Section 10, 11, 20, that is current town ordinance.
Got it, but
So
I'm.
we're not changing anything.
No, I understand we're not changing anything, but it should be
It
changed.
should be changed.
I agree, right? We don't want people burning rubbish, but at the same time, we want to have a bond. I mean, yes, I know it says that technically, if they're burning it for
No.
non-commercial cooking and food, that, so technically, if you were cooking a hot dog over the fire, it's legal.
Yes.
But if you don't cook the hot dog over the fire pit, it's now illegal.
Just sitting out.
So that I don't know how we tweak that.
Yeah. always start to work on that.
I don't think it would be, I don't think it's.
Yeah, look at it. It literally is. It's
Unlawful,
prohibited. Yep.
unlawful to burn,
Handle or
burn,
maintain
within
any
town
bonfire
I know those
or
solid
burn or
facts.
permit to be burned any trash, paper, rubbish, waste paper, wood, weeds.
Except when.
Correct. The only exception
Except when.
is if you cook food. So if
Yeah.
you have the marshmallow over the fire, it's legal. If you
Keep a
don't-
hot dog nearby.
But that's, no. No, but yeah,
I would
You
only
don't
know
want
that
to kill it with fire in the
my
yard.
backyard and have
But
no
at the same
idea.
time, if they want to throw a fire pit and not have the
Yeah.
marshmallows there.
I think there should probably be a height limit.
Yeah, well, a screen
Or
or a screen limit
Green.
for ashes, like that, I understand, but.
I can look into some practice.
Yeah, yeah. It is something that allows people to use a fire pit. That should be allowed.
Pretty sure.
The intent is there with the food.
And I think it should be allowed, but also falling within any burn restrictions and.
Oh, absolutely,
Right, so that should be in there.
yeah.
No, we shouldn't,
Burn restriction.
Burn restrictions.
Like if the,
Like
The
if
county
there's,
has-
if there's a, like, a no burn,
yeah, so that's not us to enforce then, right? That would be like a county.
well, but I think it code should follow in suit with that, so if there is, because the last thing we want is somebody on the outskirts of town with a fire pit, wind pitches up, there's a burn restriction, that goes into the field, that field's toast, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I just feel like we should include things that are already enforceable by others,
yeah, 'cause-
or they determine the status.
But
Cause LCSO would be the one enforcing it, so they're in the county, correct?
Because. we
Okay.
determine
Which makes sense.
I guess.
yeah, I would agree with trustee Daly at this, kind of our other stuff, not getting into other.
Yeah.
government territories. I would prefer we stick within ours, so I think, yes, we can say some basic things here. Although, then it gets to that, like, I mean, do we want to say great, or do we say like, it's like my brother, he's got a built-in fire pit and he's got bricks around, there's not a screen. over
Fire
it, but
containment
it's
area.
contained. Better contained than my fire pit that has a grate, his is actually far better.
I'll
Look into it.
I'll look for some. This is an example of an area where that would be a substantive change that I'm not making. But, but good catch.
Yes, I know that was, I saw that was old code, I'm just like, so it's not like, oh, it's just like, it's just probably been there forever.
I've never seen it in court.
Has the town of Wellington ever had its own jail?
Well, they go to.
No, I mean, like,
county jail.
its history.
I don't think I've ever seen one.
Still have a jail in the basement.
I feel like I've heard that before.
Is there?
I've heard this story, I've heard this as well.
Does it even exist?
I don't know.
There is.
A legal jail or a non?
Do you want that on the record publicly?
We've had conversations about throwing missiles.
Oh, technically, I would have to go in and bottle it. I think they like a football.
We've had conversations about that.
Yes, we've had conversations about.
When the Parks Department got the bow and arrow set up, for bow and arrow, that's a violation, another section that actually has a specific authority, of the town
Plastic.
administrator to.
It's like blow up.
Could it be something with the intention of
Causing harm,
or something like
harm
that,
to
rather
self
than
or
saying
property?
for a car, or this, or that, like, would they?
But what about the realm of like, a kid that accidentally freaks it over his backyard and hits the neighbor's siding? There is a portion that I don't remember where it is that talks about if it's done safely and contained. That's actually in there. Now I've gotta go find it.
Would it not? Then in that case.
Ooh.
Yeah, I've almost bought those so many
Hey,
times.
those are actually, the long metal spike ones are actually like outlawed.
Yeah, I know.
So now you only get the little
They're illegal.
and weighted
to
end
use,
ones.
But you can get them auctions all the time.
Yeah.
And they are intense.
We had those. I love them.
There's no definition of missile. I mean,
I just, sorry, that one. just-
no, that
That's
always strikes me as well.
Yeah.
It's also, yeah.
No throwing of missiles.
So Article 4, page 18, item B, line 4, necessary sanitation, health, and safety measures adopted by any applicable government authority.
Okay, start over where,
Page 18.
page 18,
Article 4,
okay.
section B,
Okay.
number 4,
It's section 10.4.10. B.
Yes.
Yes.
but then number 4. Necessary sanitation, health, and safety measures adopted by any applicable government authority.
Yeah, it's gonna get back to, I saw that too.
Yeah.
Back to enforcing other people's rules.
So, I don't know
Like,
how that one needs to be looked at, or.
I
In
mean,
addition to any authority granted by any other
It's-
law,
and this is about public property. This gives the authority of a public official to write rules and regulations for public property with relation to all of this list. And I think we would want the town, we would staff having the authority to issue rules and regulations. This is about,
but this
This-
is any.
this is,
Any applicable,
it's, in addition to the authority granted by other law, an officer or agency with the power of control or supervision of a public building or property. So this is about somebody with the authority to have control, management, or supervision of a public building or property, may adopt orders, rules, or regulations. Skip down, including with relation to the following. So it just gives a whole list. This is saying for public property, the people who have control over the public property, which are town staff who have authority over public property, get to write the rules and regulations for that public property for all of this list. And we would want them to be able to write rules with relation to health, safety measures, even those adopted by other applicable government agencies. I think we would want them to be able to do that because we want our staff to be able to control our buildings. It doesn't say they have to, it says they have the authority to do so.
Oh, and I don't mind our staff.
That's what this is saying.
No, this
That's-
says any applicable.
No, that line is in correlation to B. So you have to read B to then understand
Right,
4.
in addition to any authority granted by any other law, an officer or agency with the power of control, management, or supervision of a public building or property may adopt such orders, rules, or regulations as are reasonably necessary for the administration, protection, and maintenance of public buildings and properties specifically. It doesn't, not one area in here lays out that this is discussing the town of Wellington even.
It's about public property within the town of Wellington. It's under Wellington's laws. I mean, it can't be any other.
It's kind of, I wrote here it is as a layer in effect, that in addition to other agencies that may enforce their own state, federal, and other applicable laws, the town may also apply those rules for our property.
For our public properties, including all these things, and I don't think we want to limit it. I don't want to do anything to limit the ability
No,
to
no,
control
it's
public
not.
property.
I'm not looking at limiting anything, just making sure that we again reiterate that we are not enforcing
Yeah.
state or
If it's
federal.
us- if it's us making our own rules about that, that's fine. If it's
Right.
us enforcing other people's rules, that I'm not okay with. Okay.
Us making our own rules for a litany of reasons. That is one reason we might make our own rules.
And doing that without limiting the ability of other higher agencies to
Sure.
also enforce.
If they want to come in and enforce stuff, they're welcome to do that, but I just,
Yeah.
yeah, perfect. I have the same thing too. Thank you for clarifying that, because I was like, hold on.
Okay, so page 9.
So I do point of order at 10 o'clock. So I don't know, we said we stop at 10, we can either do 2 sessions or 15 minutes or we.
I say we let trustee Teets finish this question and we wrap it up. Does the board agree?
We're
And then we
almost
just-
certainly gonna have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, let's do it. But we might as well get this finished and then.
DG, is that page 9?
Oh, no, now I have to actually pick a subject. I have one following question. We will revisit this again.
Yeah.
Okay, so section C on page 9. And I know this goes back to a lot of the conversations that you have about saving town's money and not pursuing trials and stuff like that. But the Sixth Amendment specifically lays out our rights to a jury trial. And then the Seventh Amendment goes on to support that civil is even protected in that $50 and up. So what this does, if we do cast this out, we are writing an ordinance against our constitution.
Well, that's not, first of all, this isn't changing anything with regard to jury trial. The current code says such person shall not be entitled to a trial by jury for anything that's found to be a violation of any of those items in section C.
Right, it
So-
shouldn't have been written that
so-
on, in my opinion, shouldn't have been written that way. in the
That- Then everything under section D, which are the criminal offenses, are entitled to a jury trial.
Right,
And the law in Colorado, the case law says that a jury trial is not necessary in all cases, in particular where jail is not a potential penalty. That is not a conclusive item, but that's. The short of it is, a jury trial is required in Colorado for municipal offenses where there is a matching or very similar state offense. So if you scroll down to section D here, this is resisting arrest, escape, which actually need to be crossed out because I think those are going to be, I'm proposing those be repealed. Assault, menacing, these are the criminal offenses, and you'll find identical offenses in the state statutes. Those items that are in C, those are municipal offenses. Those are not considered criminal, or they're not considered criminal offenses that are above the level of petty offense.
So a jury would not be necessary.
So under state law, a jury would not be required for any of these offenses, if there's even a similar thing under state law. So this is absolutely in line with the law in Colorado. It allows jury trials for those where there's a matching state offense. That's not to say it's required. If you would like to have a jury trial authorization for all of these, I think that just costs would balloon. The items that are here in C, which are municipal offenses, this is 90% of what we see in the court.
right, but so, and that's still at the end of the day, it specifically states such person shall not be entitled to a trial by jury.
Yeah.
So, and that is removing someone's right to a trial by jury.
It's saying they do not have a right to a trial by jury in these cases, yeah.
And the Sixth Amendment specifically states,
That's the law in Colorado. The law is that a jury trial is not required for certain offenses. If they are
Like you
below a
won't get a
certain level.
trial by jury for a speeding ticket.
Yeah,
the law of Colorado doesn't supersede the Constitution of the United States.
it's case law in Colorado that applies the US Constitution and the state constitution directly with regard to municipal offenses. I mean, if there's case law directly on point. That's not to say it's required. If the town wants a jury trial for all violations, then we should actually allow, I think I should also open it up to all traffic violations as well. It should be open to. If they open up for these, you kind of need to open it up for everything.
I'm just bothered that wild and dangerous animals are removed off the list. I'm bothered that
Well, no, they're-
cruelty
They're
to
already
animals.
on the list.
Huh?
You keep saying they're removed off the list. C already says that none of these violations of none of these are entitled to a jury trial. So under current town law, wild and dangerous animals, if you're charged with a violation of that, you're not entitled to a jury. Right now.
Right, no, but what I'm saying is we're leaving off, so I don't know if anyone here has ever been attacked by a dog. But having the right to have,
That's actually section 74510, which is a vicious animal. It's under section D, and it's a right to trial by jury trial.
so for wild and dangerous animals,
No, vicious animal.
Wild and dangerous animal wouldn't be in a dog attack. A wild and dangerous animal would be possession of an animal that's not a dog.
Possession of mountain lion,
yeah.
And a vicious animal would be a totally separate offense.
And what will the jury determine?
Trustee, I'm sorry, let me back up a little bit. So what section C does, and the reason that all of these are crossed off on section C versus D, is there is actually a lot of cases where they were not consistent. The town changed one item and made it a criminal offense, but they failed to take it off the list on C. So it was listed both as a non-criminal offense and a criminal offense, and I hate that. I want things to only have to be changed one place. So what I did with C, really the only change here was section C, I removed the entire list of offenses. And it now says, section D, these are the criminal ones. Section C says, everything except those criminal ones are non-criminal. That's why this is being crossed off here. This isn't changing anything with regard to the right to a jury trial. That's already in town code. So,
Right,
but even if it's crossed off, that's really just about cleaning it.
Okay, so you're saying, I'm just clarifying this. So section C is written over into section D, and those items are able to be entitled.
Under current code, section C says the following sections of the code are designated non-criminal violations. And then it gives a list, an enumerated list. And then section D says the following sections of the code are designated criminal violations. What happened was items were added to both lists. So we actually had cases where they were confusing and it's unnecessary. So instead of having two lists that the town had to maintain, we have one list. And it just says, these are the criminal violations. Anything else falls under the non-criminal violation. So it's just the reason they're crossed off and see it's really just a housekeeping to ensure continuity across the place.
But then the stuff in section D, we're pretty much removing all jail time
Jail time.
possibilities.
Well, that's my proposal. I mean, that's, yeah.
But if they want to take it to the district court.
The majority of the time when these laws are being enforced by our police officers, they will write the ticket according to how they're already writing to go to the court. Because they know the our court does not have the jail sentence. I mean, we do, but
It has the authority, but we're not gonna do it. And of this list under D, one of the reasons I'm trying to kind of clean it up is in the last 2 years, I have seen vicious animals in municipal court, criminal mischief in municipal court, theft. No, fireworks is not a criminal offense. I think that's it. Out of this whole list in D, I think I've only seen those 3 items come through municipal court over the last few years. So these are not used a lot because if they're serious enough, and if we have arson or escape or resisting arrest on its own doesn't make sense if they're not arrested. Why would they arrest somebody, take them to jail, and then write them into municipal court with a violation for resisting arrest? And so taking jail off the table is because they're simply not writing these tickets in municipal court if jail seems appropriate. And I would agree, because the few items that I've seen off of this list where jail is a potential sentence or penalty, jail would not remotely appropriate in those cases. So jail, if somebody should go to jail, they're probably gonna go to district court. They would go to district court. They're just not gonna remove it.
Yeah, so this doesn't remove the ability of an officer to pursue jail time.
No,
Okay,
just not in municipal court.
got it. I thought this removed all possibility of assigning jail time.
No,
At all.
and that's the thing is,
Okay,
all of these criminal offenses, they're pretty much duplicated in state law. And so at every point, if somebody were violated, like stole something, so a deputy contacted somebody for theft, they're gonna look at them and go, do I write this into municipal court? Or do I send them to district court? And really, they're only sending them to municipal court if it's or particularly important to the town.
Appreciate all the Oxford comments. Thank you.
Ah,
My final.
Like kind of state law on the jury trial, so not tonight, but it's worth
That's pretty fun.
conversation and maybe putting a note together of the vote for us on that, because I agree. Constitution says something, I'm not saying that we changed it, but if we're going against that, we need to, if we make the decision to continue doing that, we need to do that, but it's a conversation. We also want to know the full Constitution. Perfect.
so I do have one favor to ask you guys. Please pray for my daughter Ella. She ships out on Monday.
Oh my
So,
God.
we're doing, yeah, they moved us her ship out date. So she was supposed to go on the 25th and now she's leaving